In particular, this live is also streaming on our friend RTP and Felice's live, and they are going to be, like I said, streaming it on their YouTube channel. So I want to give a shout out to them. There is a description of the various links to Daniella's book, and we'll go over those throughout the evening. First of all, I want to say before we bring her up, UnCULTured. I finished this book. It is absolutely amazing. It's an incredible true story that I don't even know if we can put it to. I can't put it to justice. I think she's going to have to talk us through it. But there's a lot to cover. Anyway, the version that's in the TikTok shop, her TikTok shop, there's a link in my bio. That will take you directly to that. There's also a link in her bio. We'll talk about that. That's an autographed version. The book is also available on Amazon in paperback version. There is an Audible audiobook and a Google Play featured. Also available in Libby in your local library. There's a background, Anthony, if you have it. I think I might have sent you that.
It's not allowing me to bring it up.
Okay.
It's saying it's too big.
Okay. Maybe Greg can help with that, so we can make sure that we can address all the various points of conversation for this evening, but that's fine. Okay, so let's have that conversation. Hang on one second. We'll bring you up, and I see you there, Danielle. I want to give you a proper introduction. Before we go too deep this evening, I first of all want to say a few things, because a lot of people were involved in getting this together and putting this on, and we could not do it with everybody's help, without my co-host, without our amazing mods, without mods from other creators, without the support of other creators to allow us to do this and to be able to stream this on a YouTube platform. And I think it's incredibly necessary that we all share in this conversation, because this is a topic that we've all want to get into. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest for the evening. Hello, Daniella.
Oh no, did I do this right?
We got you. We can hear you. Just have to turn your camera on.
Okay. Let me figure out how to do that.
Click on the picture. You'll see the little camera icon, and then you hit save, and that will do it.
I'm not even seeing the picture right now. It just disappeared.
Okay. If you just click on I'll give you
the... now I see. Now I see. Okay. Hi.
Can't see it just yet, but are you able to find that icon button?
Yes. I can see the camera on. Are you not seeing me?
No.
Okay.
Why don't you we've seen this before. Oftentimes TikTok has its fun, it's glitchy kind of fun. Why don't you drop down and then request again, and hopefully that'll reset it for you.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. And when you come back up the next time, Daniella, what we'll do is just have you, when you hit the camera icon, just hit save. And then Nikki, if you're out there, why don't you request, and we can bring you up and you can have that conversation too. Okay. So we can get the mod details out of the way. I'm going to send Daniella an invite. There you are. There we go.
Hey.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Before we go too deep, I just want to invite one of our mods up just to kind of go over some couple of housekeeping notes, and we'll move through that quickly, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Hi, Nikki. You look beautiful tonight.
So much.
You look beautiful. I love your curls.
Okay, Nikki, what do you got for us, friend?
Hair control.
Very good. I want to say good morning, or good evening for everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. If everybody can please like and share the screen, and like and share the live, and get us up to about 25,000. This is where we usually find is the best to protect the live. If you can share it with everybody, friends, foes, whatever. We're going to try to get as many people as we can so we can have a great conversation tonight. If you would like to join our Discord, we actually have a book club, which our first book was UnCULTured. I'm almost done. I have to tell you, I got the audiobook, and it's amazing to hear you read the audiobook. I have to tell you, it's just, it's the only way I think I could have read this book is by listening to you. So I'm just, it's brilliant. I love that. If you all could tap the screen and get us up to that. So I came up to tell you about our Discord. It's fairly new, but we're building a really good community. Like I said, we have an introduction channel. Once you come in, you can introduce yourself and we'll get to know you guys. We have our book channel, our book club channel. We have our Facts What's for Dinner channel, since he seems that's his favorite thing to do. We have a news channel, chatting, memes. We have a Get Out the Vote channel. And coming soon, and very soon, Facts After Dark, and an Are You Okay channel, where we're going to have links and everything for information. If you need to get the invite for Discord, you can get it in Fax's LinkTree up in his bio. Or if Greg, who's one of our mods, you'll see him down there, and he's got a little red, white, and blue icons. He'll comment down there. You can also find it in his LinkTree. Both of them are working. If they're not working, you can contact one of us mods and we can get it for you. Anybody that would like to ask a question, please request, and we will ask you what your question is so you can get it to us and we can get it to one of the mods. So please just be attentive to who's contacting you in the chat. And have a wonderful life. I'm so excited for this. This is going to be wonderful.
Thank you, Nikki.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right. So let's dig in a little bit here. First of all, I need to ask you about your shirt.
So my that passage, because of course I forgot, but I'll find it. In my day in the Army, so this is like 2009, 2010, 11. Which is the surge in Afghanistan, right? So President Obama puts 100,000 additional troops in Afghanistan in 2009. So like the heart of my career happens during this time. This is also, spoiler alert, going to be kind of when we take down the combat ban and desegregate the Army by gender. And one of the things that they used to say to us, kind of as a slur almost, was, oh, look, it's Combat Barbie. And this would be like when we are in our full soldier kit, kind of, right? So whatever you think of G.I. Jane, right? We haven't really seen the military woman soldier on the big screen, but like if you can picture that, right? Wearing the helmet, wearing the uniform, all the weapons, all the everything. And we're in captain bars, right? Like I would be told, oh, look, it's Combat Barbie, not, oh, look, it's our intelligence officer, not, oh, look, it's one of the first women in deliberate ground combat. It's Combat Barbie. So I did name a chapter of my book, Combat Barbie.
I recall.
And I have like a pretty concise paragraph that I can just read, I think, that explains it, if that's okay.
Go for it, please. Thank you.
And so I am the only woman on this patrol. This is in secret. It's still illegal for women to go deliberately into combat missions, which are missions where we expect kinetic activity, like we expect things to go boom. So I'm the only woman and there's 25 men. The guys got this, I told myself. They know what they're doing. We assumed our practice patrol position and began to march forward. Our intelligence briefs told us there wasn't supposed to be much danger, but nobody on this team took anything for granted because we have just lost 10 of our guys in an ambush. I eyed First Lieutenant Andy Huang, the new platoon leader who'd been brought in to replace John, and felt grateful he didn't look nervous. I settled my face, careful not to show any emotion in front of the guys. I clicked into being Combat Barbie. A slur some male soldiers hurled at us women who dared to play their game. But we leaned in and decided to claim the term with pride. Combat Barbie was perfect, professional, and proudly serving. So what if she was pretty too? And there's so much that goes into that, but I also just want to say that in 1980, Mattel, the Department of Defense, partnered with Mattel to produce Combat Barbie. The number one thing they fought about, as Anthony will probably understand, is the hair, because Mattel would not release a Barbie whose hair could not be combed. And military, until very, very recently, you had to be perfect bun. And this is super significant. I really want us to get back to hair control. But so they produced this woman with this very non-military hair. And then they made Ken. And guess who was higher ranking?
Shocker.
Shocker. One sergeant rank. So like you have to know, but still. Anyway, so I have promoted Combat Barbie to Captain Barbie, and she lives with me now, and she's also my first Barbie because
The
I
battlefield
didn't really
promotion.
have childhood because of growing up in a cult. And she always loses that boot, so she's kind of Cinderella too, even though I have glued it on many times.
I wonder who was making the decisions as far at Mattel as to who determined what rank was what, and then and where and how.
Sometimes I just like imagine those IPRs, like those meetings that they're having.
Right.
I was an intelligence officer during the surge, and I deployed twice. And I have never had more planning meetings than the time they made me plan the 5K to raise money for the unit ball.
Oh, that's interesting.
I just think those planning meetings, but very interestingly, right, in 1980 was the Department of Defense realizing that they needed to influence little girls, Barbie age playing girls, to want to grow up and join the military.
Recruit.
And I hope we also get back to like the difference between recruiting then and now, because these are all like super deep topics.
Anthony, I know just briefly, if you could tell, I mean, you've told me your story about, the decision that you made to recruit and what your goal was.
Yeah. So, hey, thank you first for being here. Thank you for your service. I joined because I wanted to get the fuck out of town. There was no economic prospects for a 19-year-old in 1986. There were no jobs, and I really was just fed up. So, because my family had been Navy for years, too many, I walked into the recruiter's office and I said, "How soon can I get out of here?" Which, as you know, that's like a recruiter's dream, right? They're like, "Oh, have a seat." Right?
I walked in and said, "Make me an officer."
Yeah.
Bear with me, guys. Sorry,
Yep.
keep going.
And, a couple weeks later, I was on a plane to San Diego. So I spent 8 years, so 86 to 94, and I was in what is known as a special boat unit. Now it's called SWCC, Special Warfare Command, but same, right? So taking Navy SEAL units and Army Special Forces people and putting them through the paces of being in a riverine unit. And making sure they don't drown while doing that, because that's pretty important. So I always tell people who aren't veterans that thank me for their service not to, because I didn't join for you and I didn't join out of patriotism. I needed a job, and I needed to figure out, what life was really all about. And I think you know this too. The one thing the military will give you is an understanding of what you don't want to do going forward. And that's a huge leg up on other young adults, right? Knowing that there's at least one thing you can check off the list of things you might want to do. And so for like a lot of us, after 8 years, I had really, there's only so much you can take, I think, unless you're really dedicated to doing that 20. And I applaud people that can, because that takes a special kind of person. But the benefits are pretty cool. I mean, if you make rank, you're not hurting when you get out. But I always say this jokingly, half not jokingly. I really made a lot of good friends in the military, but having to report to people who were really basically stupid that outranked me started to weigh on me. Right.
Right.
Because I was that guy in the unit that did all the admin work for the E7 and the E8 because they didn't know how, and that was fine, you know.
I'm sure.
And
I don't mean to cut you off, brother.
yeah,
I'm sure we'll touch on that throughout the evening. I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
make
yeah,
sure
yeah,
that we're sensitive to Daniella's time, because I think
yeah,
these are
of
important
course.
conversations, which is part of the reason for being here tonight. Before we get too deep, I want to just remind folks, if you'd like to support the channel, there's a pay-ups above my head. Daniella's book is linked in my LinkTree. It's the top link. It will take you directly to her TikTok shop version, which is the autographed copy. Correct, Daniella?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. It's
If
also
you buy
available
it
in.
through TikTok, I will be signing it tomorrow on my live and chatting with you.
That's
At least
beautiful.
I'll try to get to all of them.
You will. You
But
will.
you can
You will.
also, you can buy it through anywhere you buy books. You can buy it in large print and digital and audio, which if Nikki's not still listening, like, tell her thank you so much, because of all the things I went through. I think recording that audio and having to do it in 5 days was one of the hardest things. And so I feel like it has a piece of my soul, and I'm really, really grateful for everyone that listens to the audio as well.
It's wonderful. And it's also, again, Audible in Google Play and Libby for libraries, which is the audio version that you can get at your local libraries. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'd ask you that question. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Since you brought up, you brought up your military. First of all, I want to say it's so funny seeing you when you're knitting. You had a question, Anthony?
Play the disclaimer, please.
Sure. Actually, it's a good call. Let's do that really quick. Stand by, everybody. We have a disclaimer that when we get into sensitive topics, Daniella, we've learned that it's probably a good idea to have these disclaimers played in advance, so bear with us.
TikTok. It is our intention during these live broadcasts to only provide fact-based information to the absolute best of our ability. We strive to never spread misinformation or to platform those that do. Opinions of our guests or commenters are theirs and theirs alone and do not reflect those of the host. Hate speech is not allowed, and we are diligent about policing it. This platform is for educational purposes only. We now return you to our regularly scheduled pandemonium, already in progress.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so I find it interesting talking to you now and seeing you with your knitting and when you're signing your lives, and I see your hair and your curls, and I see that picture that's in your book of you're in your uniform and your hair is short and chiseled, and you brought up your time in the service. So I think it's interesting. Obviously, we're going to spend some time this evening talking about your experience in Children of God, and your escape, but you make a lot of connections to your time in the military with your experience in the Children of God cult. And I'm wondering specifically, would you have written this book if you had not joined the service?
No, absolutely not. Even when I was in the service, so when I was a 24-year-old lieutenant, like being literally triggered for the first time, right? I mean, the way I describe it is I'd gone from being a cult child behind these commune walls to being one of the daughters of America that disappears behind the high commune walls of the Department of Defense. And as soon as I deployed to Afghanistan, I'm 23 years old, I'm behind these huge walls that I cannot leave, but the threat for me is inside the walls, right? Like the threat of schmexual violence is so intense that my boss literally tells me, you're probably gonna get raped while we're here. Right. And this is after my other boss has told me to, in the most quoted line of UnCULTured, don't get yourself raped. Right. And so for me, like, there were these parallels. But the book I started writing during that deployment was just called The Girl from Nowhere. And it was my first attempt to try to sort it out. And that would have been a totally different book. Although I am proud that I put that line in UnCULTured, The Girl from Nowhere, when I'm like really struggling as a soldier. And I just want to go home. But I don't think it would have been the same book if Donald Trump hadn't been the president. I mean, I was kind of here. I'd grown up in this cult. I've had this relatively storied career in the military, and I was working like in veteran services, so in a very veteran friendly place, when I started trying to tell my stories. And I kept being told like, oh, well, the cult is obviously evil, which, asterisk, nothing is ever obviously evil in the place where it like grows from. And then people would turn around and say, oh, but the US Army, that's a wonderful organization. You know, and not only is that not really my experience at all, but the US Army is 1.3 million humans trained to unalive other humans as efficiently as possible. You know, the way I kind of explain it now with my group development organizational psychologist self is like a military's job is to program individuals to conduct violence on behalf of state, right? Like that's what we're taught to do. We're programmed for 8 weeks to 6 months, and then we're deprogrammed for 3 days. This is how you get a job, right? Even what Tony said was so significant because he's like, you find out what you don't want to do. And part of all the problems with all the transition programs for veterans is they're just trying to translate what you did in the military to what that is in the civilian world. And like much of the time, you didn't get to choose. You know, I got to be an intelligence officer because I run fast. Fortunately, that was what I wanted.
Sure.
Actually, the number one thing I wanted was infantry, but because part of that job interview was getting on a table and letting them look you up the V so that they could slot you in as a second-class citizen. Super traumatic, by the way, and every woman that has heard me talk about this is like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. But to me, this is the beginning of like the othering in the Army. But it's also, you know, for everyone, right? When you go to the military entrance processing facility, this is when it starts. This is when the dehumanization process starts. And I love seeing Tony nodding, right? So that's when it starts. And you're going to go through, you know, the best thing my not great of an ex-husband that we know about if we read the book, but we don't want to spoil.
Yes.
The most helpful thing he said to me is reception is worse than basic training, and basic training is worse than the real Army, right? And so first you go to MEPS, and they make you just do a series of embarrassing and probably not quite necessary things.
Just for our audience, the acronym MEP stands for?
Military Entrance Processing Station.
Okay, thank you.
So you're gonna go sleep at a hotel overnight, and they're gonna wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're gonna drive you to MEPS, and then you're gonna spend the whole day trying to prove to them that you are qualified to be in the military, physically and mentally. And then they're gonna send you off with a ticket to the airport. And for my group, they just made sure that we arrived with 72 hours of not having slept. I was literally the hero because I knew about the USO from being a military spouse, and so I brought us all in there, and we got to like sleep in the chairs in the DFW. But sleep deprivation, right, all of it. But reception is when you're being just systematically dehumanized and processed into the machine. And reception, by the way, is the same thing they call your first week in prison. And then you go to basic training, and this is where my book starts, right? Where the very first thing of Army basic training, and I knew this was coming because my husband had just done it before me, is the duffel bag exercise, where you're standing there with your 50-pound duffel bag above your head, and they're screaming at you, and you haven't slept in 72 hours, and they've arranged for it to be very sunny or pouring rain. I literally think they wait for like extreme weather to launch your class. And then you have like your ultimate cult moment, right? For me, this was my moment of going first, oh, I just joined another cult, right? Boom. That's the answer to your question. Sorry to be so long-winded, right? Like that was the beginning of the book being this story. And then my second thought was, oh, I'm going to be better at it than all of these suckers because I know how to cult, right? Like I can perform. And I have since realized that since publishing UnCULTured, that it's very common to go from high control religion or narcissistic family that you have to escape, maybe something Tony might have or might not have gone through, or just small town America that you have to escape, that's a little bit culty, and go into the military. And at least as far as high control religion kids go, like across the board, we agree, like there was nothing harder. So for me, there was nothing the military asked me to do ever that was harder than my childhood.
Sure.
And there was no level of secret keeping in the United States government at a top secret clearance level that I hadn't already gone through in the cult. And that's another very interesting parallel as far as like when you grow up or spend time in a cult where justified lying exists, that plays out in your life in other lying sorts of ways, whether that's having a top secret career or having an affair. I mean, it's just very interesting. And I'm talking to
You mentioned, well, no, thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned, by the way, we're speaking with Daniella Mestyanek Young, who is the author of UnCULTured. I just want to read a brief sort of summary of her book. We're talking to her this evening. Escape by definition is rarely easy. And in UnCULTured, Daniella illustrates just how difficult it can be. Leaving the children of God, the cult she was born into, and surviving the U.S. Army, a group she chose to enlist in as a young adult, have both left many scars. Lucky for readers, she found her way through both experiences and then wrote it all down. 5 out of 5 star reviews, lots of those, by the way, Danielle, I'm sure you know, referred to as the best cult memoir out there. From one cult survivor to another, this is the best memoir of surviving a childhood trapped by the insanity of a cult that I've ever read, and I've read them all. Danielle's writing style is simple, direct, and searingly honest. If you've been through anything similar, physical or sexual abuse, psychological manipulation and brainwashing, feeling trapped, and that you have few options for safety and freedom, or the ongoing ache of developmental trauma similar to that of the throb of a poorly healed shin bone, we've all banged our shins, so we know exactly what that feels like. And you'll find yourself tearing up throughout this book many, many times. Again, available in paperback on Amazon, Audible and Google Play, and also available at Libby in your local library. And the link in my LinkTree goes directly to the TikTok shop version, and she will be autographing those if you purchase that throughout. There's the book in her hand. Go ahead.
Also, Steve, maybe this is a good time for me to pull my Taylor Swift move.
Do it.
And announce that both in celebration and in gratitude of my community on TikTok hitting 100K and like what we've been through this year, I am going to be releasing my second unpublished memoir called Un-American.
Oh.
Where we go even deeper into cult stories and army stories. But this time, instead of looking at it from group behavior, we're looking at it through the lens of power, privilege, otherness, whiteness, and what it means to be un-American / un-American.
Gotcha.
And I never published it. And so instead of publishing it, I'm going to like release it on TikTok, and we're gonna have some special book clubs where if you sign up for my book club, you're gonna get like a locked PDF to come and discuss. And then whenever TikTok unlocks their series, I'm gonna release that as a series where I am knitting and reading it to you. And it's deep and it's raw and it's all of these topics, but we're just still going and deconstructing more stuff. At the end of UnCULTured, I found out right before I sold UnCULTured, and you will find out some information about my ex-husband that changed everything. Yeah. And as at that point, 33 years old, an expert on extremism and radicalization, and with this book about to come out, I could see the entire path of what he had traveled, but I also could see how close I had come to even more extremism in my life. And I was like, well, I need to write this out. You know, I need to like keep looking at all of these stories again. And this really is kind of my TikTok channel is just, this is what we do. We just talk about all of these things and like.
It's great. It's great. It's a great distraction for someone who's got at least 4 books in various forms of completion. Myself, I tip my hat to you for banging out as many as you have, because I can't get one across the finish line. But that's a different conversation. I want to go back to something you had talked about because the book opens again. We won't spoil it for anybody, but the book opens with you in boot camp, and I think you start off with, without spoiling it, the first rule of being in a cult is you're not in a cult. And I think Fight Club comes to mind, right? The first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The first rule of submarines is you don't talk about submarines, that kind of stuff. So it sort of hit me. So did you expect, you just sort of talked us through that a little bit. Did you expect the experience to, I know your husband at the time described what he'd been through and his experience enlisting and going through boot camp. Did you expect it to be as similar as to what you had grown up in?
So there's a thing in cults called a thought-stopping cliche, and this is something we just tell you to stop you critically thinking. And I think you knew what you signed up for is one of the biggest thought-stopping cliches of all time. And I promise you, I thought that I did. I mean, I think I literally say that in the book. I knew what I was signing up for. I was wrong. And I mean, I so thought I knew what I was signing up for. I mean, I researched the officer career. Like, I loved this idea. He kind of stole it from me, I feel like. Did it first. I wrote him every day, right? Like, I had the most intelligence about showing up to basic training. But first of all, one simple thing. I'm a woman. He's a man. Your number one job in basic training and the rest of the Army, it's boot camp in the Marines, basic training in the Army. So we got to get our cult lingo right. Your number one job is not stand out, you know, and we tell you in the Army, we have a saying, like, all you have to do to be successful is be in the right place, in the right time, in the right uniform, and never volunteer for anything, right? Like, don't stand out. And so my strategy, the same in school, right? High school, not deserving to be there. College, trying to be the valedictorian. Army, definitely not deserving to be an officer. I was just like, you only stand out for the good things, right? So I ran a 5-minute mile. You know, like, if this is what we're going to care about, this is what we're going to do. And there's no way you know what you're signing up for. This is why I say it's a thought-stopping cliche. Like, it's not true. But also it's only used to shut down critical complaint, right? Like, is that phrase ever used in a good way? No, it's just another version of you were asking for it. And you know, it's actually really tragic to see on reviews of my book, people saying, like, what did she expect? You know, she knew what she was signing up for. Like, she knew she was going with a bunch of violent, angry men. And like, is that how we talk about American soldiers, Anthony? Like, don't we talk about, like, loyalty and duty and honor and respect and personal courage and selfless service and all of these things?
Theoretically, we do. Those that didn't serve do not.
Yeah, yeah. And anyway, I think loyalty is a pretty dangerous organizational value. But, you know, so just for that alone, and that is kind of a theme in the book, it is this idea. You know, I say I even wrote UnCULTured so that the really good men, like my current husband, as opposed to my ex-husband, but also he better watch it. You know, for him to understand that, like, I mean, any system that's not built for you is traumatic, right? Like, you cannot be a Black person in America and not be traumatized. And I don't think you can be a woman in the Army and not be traumatized. But when I would try to have those conversations with my male peers, they just didn't get it. But you know what? When I wrote down about life as a child in the cult, my best friend, who, you know, Daniella, who we love if we've read the book, but say, like, she and I have been married for 16 years, and my husband and I have been married for 10 years. So she said to me, and my spouse said to me, like, I thought I knew, but I had no idea, you know? So the whole, which really actually ties back to rejections of UnCULTured that I got, 19 of them, before selling in a life-changing deal. I got rejections that said, in a very nice parallel, we don't do Children of God because the abuse is too awful, right? Children of God should be one of the most famous cults in the world.
So your publishers or potential publishers told you that they didn't want to address it because of how horrible Children of God was?
And this is the same reason we don't see a lot of documentaries. This is because how do you tell the story of sexualized child abuse without kind of re-victimizing more people, right? Like without, I mean, if I tell you what it took for me to put chapter 5 down, and that I've only read it 4 times, you know, one of them was recording it. You know, I mean, it's, anyways, I did go there, both on the cult side and on the army side. I think it's important to see, like, this is where, how awful it really does get. But then on the military side, I just kept getting told, we don't do books about military women because nobody reads them. And UnCULTured just hit 10,000 audios this week. Just that alone makes it one of the top selling books by a woman veteran. And I'm really proud of the fact that it is critical. It is not asking the Pentagon for permission to protest them. You know, I can tell, you know, I say in the, I try to say it in a way TikTok won't get mad at, but famously, in the book, I tell you that on our first day in the military, we are told that women in the Army are either a witch, a smut, or a D slur for lesbian. And, you know, these days I'm like, no thanks, I choose all 3. You know, like, you don't get to tell me how to tell my story. And also, my story is a part of military history. It's an important part of military history. And the whole story is an important part of military history. Like, me going out on the patrol with 25 guys and noticing something none of the men noticed, that's an important part of military history that everybody loves to talk about. Loves. It's my most popular speech. Me getting pulled aside by, in UnCULTured, you only see 1 captain, but 3 captains, 3 senior officers pulled me aside and told me to watch my back. And listen to what we're saying. We are saying that 3 military officers believed that it was not only possible, but likely, these are military intelligence officers, that 25 American soldiers were going to simultaneously lose their minds and grape an officer out on the objective, right? In an unsecure location, right? That's grape culture. And that's what nobody is talking about. And the reason I decided to tell this story was a young Mexican-American soldier disappeared, and they didn't look for her for 60 days. And when her family demanded to Congress that they produce her, they very quickly found her body in 3 shallow graves. And her name is Vanessa Guillen, and I think about her every day of my life. And the 60 days is so significant because, as I'm sure Anthony will, you know, agree with, if a rifle goes missing for 60 minutes in a U.S. military facility, unaccounted for, the entire facility will shut down. Everybody from private to general will, they call this Arms Across America. You're supposed to be literally locked arms looking for this piece of sensitive equipment. So this, Steve, was like a national message to every woman who has ever served that we care less about you than a rifle, and not by 60 minutes, by 60 days, right? And, you know, even in UnCULTured, where like there's Grape Alley, right, on a deployment, which on a deployment, it was our only path between where we lived and where we ate. It was called Grape Alley. But on every military base in America, I guarantee you, there is a place that is too dangerous for the women to go. But like, if we just imagine for a second the idea of a place on a military base that was too dangerous for the male soldiers to go. They would mount a military operation. They would clear it, right? I mean, and this is actually one of my actual proposals in the back end military stuff that I do. Like, now that they're actually starting to keep data on schmexual assault, MST, it's called, there's a name for it, military schmexual trauma. Now you can do intelligence briefs. You can put someone like me in front of a commander and you can give them a grape brief. Sir, on your base that you own, this is where it's happening. This is how it's happening. This is who it's happening to. This is the ranks and the units that are doing it. And now you've just given a commander a kinetic mission, a violent mission that they have to go solve. Let me just wrap up this personal rant by saying that every time I hear a high-ranking military man saying we don't know how to solve it, I'm literally here in a giant gold blazer with my Harvard degrees, my military experience, being like, I know, I have a 10-point plan of how to solve it. But nobody reads books about military women, Steve.
Well, Daniella, it's and this is one I want to make sure I wrote this question down because I want to make sure I ask it the right way. Obviously, it's known that it's not necessarily, again, people making the decision to serve their country, I think, is very noble. Everybody has a reason to do it for whatever that reason is. Anybody who signs up, I have respect for it. We can talk about what's happened to certain people in our culture these days, but women are obviously aware of the grape culture as you described it. Tailhook shone a light on it, but it's always existed. So what do you think is the draw for women to still want to enlist?
So glad you asked me that question because I have so many thoughts. So first of all, I will just say that the fact that an entire my generation of women, I think, still didn't quite know, right? Like millennials were just starting the information age, still didn't quite know. But Gen Z, they know. We have the first generation of military veterans, this family in this house, warning their children not to join the military. And the military is the best social elevator that we have in the country. And so basically all of Gen Z women are now kind of being denied the best social programs and social elevators that we have because of fear of what will be done to them. And there's a word for that, and it's called schmexual terrorism. So that is just one thing that this entire younger generation has going on. And no wonder it's a national recruiting crisis. And then can you just take me back to the question? Because I definitely had a second half there.
The reason with the awareness.
Why women
going
join.
in, why they still enlist. Yeah.
So the first thing I kind of just ping pong back at people when they ask me that question is for the same reason that men would join, right? For the same reason that men would join, right? I joined for all the same reasons that Anthony joined, which by the way, were all the same reasons my grandfather joined a cult. Right? It was I needed to get away. I wasn't fitting into society. I didn't know what else to do. They promised good things. I knew I was smart and I could work hard, but also just women, women might like to do war as a career just as much as men. Right? And this gets messy to talk about out loud because imperialism and empire, and I know all of that. But in the US military, we really, really harp on this is a profession, this is a career, this is the art of war, right? And I wanted to be an accomplished officer in the US Army for all the same reasons that the man next to me did, I promise you. And even getting that recognized as a reality, I think is we're still not even there yet. We still don't even realize kind of how that question in and of itself is biased. But yeah, I just think, it's the best social elevator, and it's also the best way as a woman. If you want to be, if I wasn't born in the Philippines, I could run for president this year. I probably still could, but someone will produce naked photos from the internet, but
does that matter? Does that really matter these days? I'm kidding.
I think we had hoped not after the orange guy, but who knows? But I will own it. I look good in those photos. I just don't think they're going to wave the born in, whatever the thing.
Right.
They would have figured it out for Ted Cruz, but they're not going to figure it out for a woman first.
There should be a cult exclusion on the application.
But so my best friend Danielle, who's a beloved character in UnCULTured.
Wonderful.
Yes, Danielle and Daniella. No, we're not sisters. Yes, President Obama asked us that question. When she joined, she wanted to be a UN peacekeeper, which is kind of a UN soldier. And they, for women, had to have military experience. And so I mean, when I met her, you know, I'm 22, she's 25, I'm joining the military because whatever cobbled ideas plus toxic relationship. And she has this like life plan. I'm like, wow. Now she works for FEMA in like high up in international disaster management. She is a major in the reserves and she's a civil affairs officer, which is kind of like the Army diplomats. And she's like starting her own entrepreneurial company to like deliver disaster bags and anti-rape kits to women all over the world. You know, so just like when I say it's the best social elevator, I mean, like, it is crazy to think back of what I was responsible for when I was 22. You know, when I was 25, you know, I'm trying to get out of the Army at 27 and go into physical security. And people are saying, oh, you're entry level. And I'm like, part of my security portfolio is I helped secure Bagram Airfield, an active war zone for Air Force One, so that President Obama could come and visit troops on my birthday, by the way, which is also the day I graduated from Harvard. May 25th. It's a good day. Also that
Coming
day.
up.
It's Memorial Day weekend. Yeah,
Indeed.
that's also a big chapter in the book. But, you know, so I mean, like, just the amount of responsibility, right? As a 25-year-old captain or lieutenant still, I was the senior intelligence officer for a battalion, which is 1,000 humans and about $30 billion in aircraft, right? And like, I'm responsible for getting all of those back home. That is crazy, right? So crazy. I got some really cool opportunities in between being a lieutenant and a captain. And the colonel, who's not our favorite in the book, denies me 3 different times. Not
our favorite.
And one of the times, it's not in the book because it's like, these are stories not in the book, but gotcha. I had chances to not have to be on the second crazy deployment with that unit. And I tried to go and I was denied. And I was like in Scott Halter, who's the one that we do love, who's the Army officer who put his legal name in a critical book while he was still on active duty, which is cojones. And I was in his office just saying, like, because they were saying the reason I couldn't leave was because I was the most experienced aviation intelligence officer. And I was like, your entire warcraft machine, you're telling me this is resting on the expertise of a 24-year-old right now. And we don't see a problem.
I'm still.
So it's both, I'm sorry, let me just say, like, okay. It's both incredible development, but also there's a reason it breaks us, you know, like there's a really good reason I was 100% disabled at 33. You know, it just, you really are trading your physical and your mental health for social advancement and a fulfilling career. And it's just a really crazy choice, not unsimilar to joining a company.
I want to be careful how I ask this question because I'm going to go back a little bit based on what we were just talking about, because you talked about the question I asked you about the fact that we know that misogyny exists, we know that SA still exists in the military, we know that there's Great Valley, we know these things still exist, and your response when I asked that question was because it's the same reason you chose to enlist or other women choose to enlist that Anthony chose to enlist, in spite of all that, even because to me. The barriers are even more intense for women than for anyone else just because of that. So I guess the question I have for you is, were you, because of your experience, because it's not that long in between when you left Children of God to when you decided to enlist, did you still seek out that higher authority? Was that part of your desire to be part of the system, to use words from the book?
So, but just to be clear, I think that still today, like, I didn't join in spite of that. I had no clue.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? And that's understandable. Like, people miss that with me because, like, I only spent 6 years in American culture and I was in art school. But I still think, like, there are either young women joining that don't know or just don't have any other choice, right? And many people leave a cult by jumping to an abusive relationship knowing that that's what they're doing, but that's still like their way out, right? So I do think that some women are going in knowing like this is the price I might pay, just like men go in knowing that they might sacrifice their lives. But, you know, as we just had a judge in 2022 say, rape should not be considered incidental to military service. And of course, that's one of the things we need to fight for. But for me, it absolutely was, you know, first of all, like I was in an emotionally abusive relationship that was about, I now think was a year away from becoming physically abusive. And I realized that if I stayed on the path of literature degree army wife, I was going to be isolated. I mean, I was literally so close to just being isolated in Fort Polk, Louisiana, in the swamp that Eisenhower gave World War II for them to train on. It's the base that they tell you to bring your family in at night so they can't see how, you know, depressing it is on the first night. And I was like, well, I'm not, you know, that to me, when you asked me if I saw the parallel, like I saw the parallel there.
Gotcha.
And, you know, the way I explain it in UnCULTured, which by the way, the chapter where I answered this question, why I joined the army, it's a nothing chapter called Bring Me to Life, where I'm in college and I have to tell it two ways, right? Because I was like, I was rocking and rolling, and also here's this abusive relationship. And I describe it in these chess terms as like I was forked. You know, I was either going to be trying to be a high school teacher, but probably just a stay-at-home wife with kids with a probably abusive husband, or I was going to be an officer myself. Right. And this is where my cult baby and neurodiverse sense of believing in myself, even when there's no like evidence that I should, helps me. And I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? Like, obviously I'm as good as he is, so
Sure.
I'll do it too.
It must have been a strange,
You know,
I mean,
just to finish, like 100%, like at 22 years old, I was not ready to just like be in the world, right? So I had gone from cult to 4 years of high school and to college as valedictorian with 4 jobs. Like I built these high control environments for myself. And you still have guidance in college, right? College is kind of like practice adulthood. And if I hadn't joined the military, I was just going to have a PhD by 25, you know, and just be in the cult of academia because like I couldn't. And I almost like, I looked forward to, I mean, I was graduating after a semester abroad, taking 23 credit hours and valedictorian. Like my brain was exploding and I was craving basic training because I was going to get to spend 3 months without having to think. You know, like, and then for someone that spent 6 years, like, I mean, I was so lonely, right? Like, you're trying to pass, you're trying to belong, you don't know how, you don't understand why, you don't know all your trauma, you think you can just perfect your way through it. And it was just like, for me, it was like, I can just sign away for 3 years, and not only am I going to get all that badass career stuff, right? But I can literally just like fall forward into the loving arms of the army that is going to catch me and say, here's your uniform, here's your rule book, here's your team, and here's exactly how you act. And like, that was what I needed.
Mm-hmm. You sought it. You sought it out. Yeah. You needed it. We're speaking with Daniella Young. Daniella is the author of UnCULTured. There's an autographed version of this book available in her TikTok shop at Group Behavior Gal Shop. There's also a link to it directly in my LinkTree if you want to link there. It's also available in paperback on Audible and Google Play, and also Libby Librarian, which is the audio version in libraries around the globe or in the U.S. And we're talking to Daniella about her experience not only in the Children of God cult, but her experience in the U.S. military. And we were just talking about a few parallels between both. I find it fascinating.
Can I say too, that's also available in Australia, London, Canada, New Zealand. They did not even change the spelling to awesome spelling. It's not yet available in Spanish and Portuguese because even though I do speak those languages, that's not my decision. So
got it.
If you like speak Spanish or Portuguese and you know an editor, tell them to come buy UnCULTured.
Well said.
We'll translate.
Anthony, did you have a question, my brother? Okay.
Nope.
So something you just talked about kind of got me to thinking about how you were in an environment born into an environment, the Children of God cult. For those of you who have not read her book, I'm through it. I find myself having to go back to read through some chapters because I was asking myself, what did that just say? That you were in an environment that was told the system was Satan, and anything to do with the system was the system was out to get you. And then you leave the cult, and then you join the system, and in a system that oppresses women, as you've described, and oppresses minorities, and does not treat people equally. Was it cathartic for you when you were writing your book to kind of unpack that a little bit?
So interestingly enough, my therapist tells me that it was cathartic to go into these things as a career in the first place. Like that's the first part of surviving it was like, well, I go work this out in a place where I'm in control, right? You know, like I'm in control of the threat. Like I'm the one that, you know, gets the bad guys and does these things. It was definitely cathartic to write it. Also, I think you're just a different person after you write it. And it's so cliche that I hate it. But, you know, even to do a memoir, especially one this personal, and then put it out there and be like responsive and have to hear people's feedback, you know, you really have to distance yourself and you kind of have to create a character. You know, like I say that UnCULTured is about a girl named Daniella from the ages of birth to 27. And like, that's the character you're getting. That's the story. And then like 33-year-old Daniella peeks back in the end and is like, hi, okay, I'm starting to be fine, you know? But that is for me kind of how I developed it. But then another way that I think it's so cathartic and life-changing is, you know, my favorite quote about writing memoirs: nobody reads your story, they read their story.
Indeed.
And so we really, me and the team that helped me write it, like really worked hard to have it sort of be that experience. You know, you're sort of in the eyes of Daniella experiencing this, but of course you're relating it to like what you've been through in your life. Because I think one of the values of my story is I have one of the most extreme versions of stories, right? So like we can all believe that we can all agree that the sex cult that believed in pedo for God, like we can all agree that was wrong. But then I can show people like, oh, but your group does this tactic, right? Here's my intelligence training coming in, you know? Or I can give survivors that think like their story was nowhere near mine, and they're never going to have the validity of somebody saying like, yes, your family was a cult, right? Or your church was a cult. But they can recognize their childhood in the lines of my childhood, you know? And in military, right? Like we can all agree that women that sign up to serve their country should not be brutalized. But like it happens to regular women, you know, like this happens to all the daughters of America. Like, what are we doing about it? So I do find that like it's ongoingly cathartic to be able to use the, like, not just the pain, but all of the stuff that I struggled to like put into context and language and really just explain my own experience going through it, that it's actually also helpful to like all of these other women and men who've been through a variety of different experiences.
I want to get into our conversation about extremism and what we see today in just a little bit, but I want to go back. When you and I spoke recently, I'm referring to specifically. There's a chapter in the book where you talk about a pretty serious injury, being a kid, like a kid kind of injury, that kids fall down and do some damage to themselves, and how within your community there was a lot of resistance to the system doctors and system medicine and the whole 9 yards. And I described to you something similar, not nearly as extreme, that I went through. There's a lot of people potentially that are watching tonight, and or I'm sure that you've come across, or that we've all come across, that are opposed to medical intervention to help the people that are the most important and the most vulnerable in their lives. They may not be in a cult, but they may be, well, by definition, perhaps they are. in a cult, a religious cult, where they're averse to those things. Would you have any advice for those people?
Yeah. So, the first thing I will say is like fellow survivors of Children of God who are like prepping themselves to read this book because, it's CSA, right? That's going to be very hard.
Mhm.
Then came to me and they were like, the medical neglect is actually what's the hardest to read about, right? And so medical neglect, medical abuse, geographic medical abuse, right? I mean, these are all different things that are going on in my story. To the point of being denied anesthesia for things, to the point of like willful negligence. But, what I would say to people is just like medical abuse and control is one of the things that we see in almost every cult, in almost every version of coercive control. And by that, I mean to make very direct parallels between an abusive relationship, a 1-1 cult, right? When an individual comes under the coercive control of another individual, there's one of those in UnCULTured, my first marriage. Then you have like a narcissistic family, and growing up in that, like that's a cult experience. And then you can have like a real cult like mine, right? I mean, you can have corporate cults, you can have commercial cults like MLMs, and in all of these, medical abuse, specifically through control. And I have a lot of theories about that, both as a survivor and a scholar. But one of the big things is just like, because medical personnel are the ones that are most likely to crack your brainwashing, help you get free, recognize signs of abuse, right? Like whatever it is. And so having we don't go to doctors policies is very good if you're abusive, right? Just generally. I mean, there are so many books of cult survivors, narcissistic family survivors, where the parent is a doctor and there's still a huge amount of medical abuse and neglect in those families. So it's just absolutely a piece of control, a piece of patriarchal control. And when I say that, I mean like family law comes out of property law, where women and children are objects. But then I also find it to be really, really interesting that we see a lot of, what I call the crack in the brainwashing with a cult, right? So mine is on 9/11. My people are cheering and praising God for his destruction. And I'm 14 going, oh, maybe we're the religious extremists, right? Like maybe we're the bad guys. But a lot of people have their crack in the brainwashing with a medical emergency, either for themselves or their children. And like the woman that is now my like business manager and fellow cult survivor, like she is cracked out of her cult during COVID, just watching the crazy medical stuff and what her cult was saying and preaching. And my like social scientist way of explaining this is when you have like a really significant medical emergency for yourself or your child, you often realize like there's no limit that the cult is willing to limit your sacrifice, right? Like the cult every time is perfectly happy for you to lay down your life for the organization, right? And in the Army song, the one we perform at every official event, we actually sing, and the Army goes rolling along. Anyone's son will do. We're just reminding ourselves. Even something Tony said early on, it's like you just go into the Army, they don't care where you came from, they don't care what skills you bring. Like you're just kind of a replaceable part of the machine. And there's a really good example of this in The Vow, when this one actress, like a show has to start 15 minutes late because she had to get food. And so Keith Raniere is like, the next day, he's like, what happened? And she said, oh, I'd been working too hard. I had to get food or I was going to pass out. And he just looks at her and he goes, sometimes you just got to pass out. Right. And like, that is her moment. And I will tell you like a kind of scandalous personal Army story, which is when General Petraeus, who is my military cult leader favorite example, comes to the 101st, which is where he got famous from. throws himself a military parade. Yeah, we saw another leader do that recently, right? Which is 2 days of the entire division standing out in the Tennessee summer sun for 6 hours, marching and standing still, right? And something that happens often when you're doing this is soldiers will pass out, whether it's from dehydration, whether it's from locking your knees, trying to be, standing, because you have to stand at attention. But if you lock your knees for 3 to 5 minutes, you will pass out. And so you're like trying to stand still in military bearing, but also not pass out, right? It's very, very physically taxing. And General Petraeus gives the order up front on the microphone that anyone that passes out will not be taken to the back. They will lay where they fall. Which, by the way, it's the modern military, so obviously we were not about to trample them to death. But 100 years ago, that was a military death sentence. Right? Like if you're not strong enough to stand here and do this, you deserve to not exist. By the way, one of our soldiers in my unit did pass out. He was pulled to the back because we had human people. And I'm now married to that soldier. Anyway.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Crazy stuff with medical control. And I just, to just wrap it up back to your question a little bit, I just want people to see the trends, right? And all of my work is still the intelligence officer, and our job is to show you the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the bad guys might use to harm you. And that is like 100% of what I do, just for the individual. It's like, maybe it's not a cult. Maybe I can't convince you it's a cult, but here's the cult doing that. And here's your organization doing that. And I think every data point you have in common with a cult is important.
One theme that I also noticed throughout your book, Daniella, was you always seem to be questioning things. Like you were conditioned, indoctrinated, brainwashed, but yet there was always a part of you that questioned it. I think again to that scene when you're that you describe it very well and very sort of vividly about it was the only time that you were allowed to really scream, because when you were injured and you were brought for treatment, and it seemed like that was another example of like why is someone not taking care of me here? Why is someone not helping me? I'm told I'm not allowed to scream, but now I'm allowed to scream, but nobody's coming to my aid. And again, I thought that was fascinating and very descriptive in the way that you described that. Not really a question there, just more of a statement. Unless you had comments about that.
Yeah, can I share with you a story about screaming?
Please.
Um,
Everybody,
so
please tap and share the live. We'd really appreciate that, and please gift our panelists and our guests, please. Danielle, thank you. Go ahead.
So I lost a brother in December who, chose to leave us, we think. And this is a risk factor in how kids that grow up in cults and how military veterans leave us. And he was both, just like me. And when he was a little boy, right, he used to say, "We're going to go explode in the woods," because he didn't know how to say explore. So that just became a thing with my family that, every time there was a kid, which was always, we would be like, we're going to explode in the woods. And as I am, trying to write the eulogy of this baby that I held in my arms and loved and parented, and, I just kept thinking like how ironic it is that we were never allowed to do that, right? We were never allowed to just run and scream. And the number one abuse that I describe of growing up in the Children of God is just no spontaneous moments of joy, right? Like we just never could. So for a number of reasons, I did not go to the funeral, but me and my little family and then my chosen family did our own event. And it involved witches' capes and the woods, and we just exploded in the woods, and we ran around and we screamed and we laughed, and I thought it was really beautiful. Yeah.
Again, just the little things that we all perhaps take for granted, that just those moments of being a kid, the innocence lost, and just the ability to express emotions that were constantly under threat and sequestered. And again, as you describe it, feelings that you were accustomed to, which made sense as to your military experience. Again, I go back to your introduction to your book when you're talking about the duffel bag and you're realizing, oh yeah, I've done this before.
Yeah, and it makes you an incredibly good soldier, right? The ability to deaden all of your emotions, but it makes you really bad at like pretending to be a human, I guess, and like, I mean, I had this crazy moment where Scott Halter, my mentor that we love from UnCULTured, who is literally like the most stoic, deadpan, scary to brief man you have ever met, even though he's a wonderful human. And I'm watching this man tell me that I don't have enough emotion in like telling my own life story, because like, if you can stand there and say things that make grown men cry and you're like, fine, like people are like, oh, it didn't really happen, or it wasn't that bad, or, it's the whole like not being the proper victim. And they just don't understand, like, no, what I have is called like that's called emotional affect, and mine is weird, right? Like I might laugh talking about horrible things, like I might feel like I need to giggle when I talk about the 10 guys that we lost, because I was disconnected from my emotions on purpose in my formative years. And I carried that through, again, military career, right? Great. I'm going to be better at this than all of them. And arguably I was. But then it broke me, and this is actually a good way into the attitude and appearance control, right? Because that is something that we always see in cults, in any version of coercive control. We see attitude control, which usually shows up as toxic positivity up front. In the military, it's don't complain, it's rank, it's, all these different things.
Suck it up, whatever.
For my next book, I'm going to write an essay in like a subchapter called Keep Sweet, Rank and Obey. And I'm like the cult attitude control, military attitude control, exactly the same. And then appearance control goes really heavily into it. And it breaks into 4 parts always that I have found, which is hair, ding, ding, ding. Huge in the military. They hate this. Body size, body coverage, and underwear, which includes socks and pantyhose. And all of these things, attitude control, appearance control, these are all super, super important. And then just bringing it back to like the emotional development, it's like after you get away from whatever your cult is, whatever your coercive control is, like you have to figure out everything on your own. And it's freedom is also so scary, and it's so hard because you literally like, I wrote this essay about how Prince Harry, veterans, and cult babies all have the same problem, which is like, he's 38 years old, but you have to practice to be good at life,
Yeah.
And he's not, but like, he has this moment in his book where he's 34 years old, he has a wife, he has a kid, he's a prince, he's a military officer, right? And he realizes for the first time that he can just hire his own lawyer. Right. He doesn't have to go through his family stuff. He's not actually trapped. And I like
you can have an opinion.
Relate to that,
right.
And you have to just kind of have this messy period when you get out of that control, I think, because you're learning to like reattach your emotions. You're learning to like who you even are, If you grew up in a cult, you never got a chance to form that. But if you joined the military before the age of 25, which is absolutely most of us, like it changed your chemistry, your body, your brain, everything forever. And we have to take off the cult, what they call the pseudo personality, but then you also have to deal with what's under there. And sometimes it's nothing, and that's super frightening.
Well, an obvious, 100,000-foot perspective on both the military and cults is they certainly don't want individuals.
Exactly.
For sure.
Your number
uniform
one
code.
job,
Yeah.
Your number one job in any high control group is don't be an individual. Right. Don't stand out. And that's why for women, non-traumatizing military service is a zero-sum game, right? And this again even goes to hair control, right? Because on the first day, if you, me, and Anthony all shipped out today, we would all show up, the same physical condition, the same whatever, we're going to go through the same training, but you two show up bald and I don't. Right? And for all of those that like to still think it's about lice and like believe what the cult told you, like what are these female resistant lice? I just love to tell people about it. I'm like, what? So women don't get lice? You know, it's the same reason we know that the general schmeck ban in Afghanistan was about racism, sexism, and purity requirements. Because when Don't Ask, Don't Tell came down, they said it was about don't get pregnant, deployability, operations. But they were really, really concerned about how to keep the girls and boys apart. And that's just a purity requirement.
I think that's a great segue opportunity because you touch on extremism a lot. You touch on it quite a bit, and you dedicate some chapters to modern day extremism. You know, MAGA, Q, the whole 9 yards. And it seems like, and this is always a question. So we've talked about this many times, Anthony and I, and through conversations we've had in this app about, from my perspective, and there could be more, but I always think about 3 distinct groups that I'll never understand how they could fall into the MAGA cult. I'll call it what it is. I'll ask your opinion on that in just a second. Women, members of the BIPOC community, marginalized groups in general, but in particular the BIPOC community, and veterans. And from talking to you, and even veterans and even active duty, from talking to you, veterans makes a bit more sense now because, again, you're looking for that higher authority. So that transition from one group to another, again, looking for something to be a part of. Does that make sense to you? That's the first part of the question. Those 3, I'm sure there are others. And the targeting of young white men in particular, from an extremism perspective, we know that extremist groups are gaining popularity. We know that a lot of them currently identify with YT supremacy groups and thus MAGA extremism. So could you help us unpack some of that, please?
Absolutely. And like, this is exactly the theme of the mini memoir Un-American that I'm going to like release soon. And like how this happened, right? Like, how did we end up with 20% veterans storming the Capitol? Which, by the way, 13% of Americans are veterans. And if we take out the ones that can't walk, like, you know, the young mobile veterans, it's like 7%. So how did we end up with 20% at the Capitol? And I tell you what, UnCULTured was prepared before the holiday, and it was set to go out to a bunch of publishers on January 6th, 2021. Wow. And it didn't. And instead, you know, my husband and I are sitting in a townhouse 15 minutes away from the Capitol watching veterans storm the Capitol. You know, and we know at the time, like, I don't know, Anthony, if you were watching it, but like there was a dude with the zip ties from his belt. And, you know, we find out this is Lieutenant Colonel Brock so-and-so. But like, we knew he didn't come in peace because we use those as handcuffs. You know, like we can see the thing. And so I've been writing about this and asking myself this, and nobody will publish my essays on this because apparently they're too extreme. But when my book went out 6 weeks later, it got bought by the first, you know, editor that saw it. And I knew that even on January 6th, because I was like, everyone like is going to have to try to understand this. So first of all, I will just come out and say kind of what I actually say in a trial in my next book to generals, which is, you know, they're asking me how someone who's a white extremist can have had such a successful military career. And my answer is because violent white men is what you select for. You know, like, I mean, let's face it, you know, this is what we want. This is what we are in the business of. And it was quite ironic because I was just looking at them and I'm like, you're trying to BS me with the way you BS civilians, you know, like, but so I really think that like, once you've been through the experience that is called identity breaking indoctrination. So military basic training, your first 72 hours in the Children of God, plus your 6 months of indoctrination. It's 6 months, both for the military and the Children of God to become like an active member. This is called identity breaking indoctrination. Fun fact, military psychologists don't usually go through it. I think because then they would have to change it. But I think once you've gone through that, and I think similar to kind of like having the self-unaliving SI ideation, is like once you've gone through that, it can more easily happen to you again, right? It's almost like your brain and your body know how to be extreme and how to just fall into a black and white worldview and how to just do that, right? And then the other part to your question of like, how does this happen? I never think we talk enough about cult recruiters. Every version of extreme groups spends a huge amount of time, money, and power getting new people. So we always talk about like the individual, like why did they fall for it, But with my grandfather, like he was we now know, probably autistic man. He had a bad LSD trip where he met Satan. And the next day he was sitting in a park with his head in his hands, and up walk the happy, pretty, shiny, bouncy children of God to sing him a song, right? And off he goes, and that's all she wrote. And this is why 5 generations of my family have been affected by this cult, right? But what did he do? He had one bad experience and he was sitting in a park, right? I mean, it's the recruiters. It's the people that did the bait and switch. This also turns into like one of my scholar concepts is the idea that a cult starts off good and turns bad. Absolutely false every time. Like a regular organization can start off good and turn toxic, but like it doesn't accidentally become a cult, right? My number one advice to not build a cult is don't be a cult leader, right? They know what they're doing. So people who join the Children of God will go to their graves saying that it started off about love, faith, and Jesus, even if they can admit that it went wrong. But it didn't. It was an alcoholic narcissist who wanted to play power games with people from the very beginning. And even the idea that it like was good once upon a time is part of the con. So I want to say, like, especially with 2 of the groups you mentioned, the women and the people of the global majority, non-white people, I think there's a lot of that, right? Like there's heavy recruiting. There's heavy bait and switch. There's so much performative appealing, a cult is really good at making it all about you until they get you to the point where you've activated high entrance costs and you don't want to pay high exit costs. As soon as they have you there, they say what they say on the first day of basic training, which is what finally convinced Stephen Hassan, world famous cult expert, that the military was a cult, is they say, we don't care what your recruiter said, we own you now, right? And that is in every cult. You see this in the vow where they're like, this is about you, this is how Nexium can help you. And then as soon as they have you, it's all about what you can do for the cult, and they will bleed you dry. And cults are always about labor, right? And who is great at giving labor to this country, if not women and people of color, right? And so there's all of these dynamics going on. And then the last thing I will say specifically about the white men is that, so yes, I do believe MAGA is a cult. I was quoted in The Atlantic recently for 5 paragraphs. Like, we all think so. We hope it's in its end game. But angry white men, right? There's a book called Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by the woman who wrote So You Want to Talk About Race. It is phenomenal. I read it out loud on my channel all the time. And it is, we have studies that show that perceived persecution is as powerful in getting people to commit violence to protect their in-group as real persecution. So honestly, the same way you appeal to people of color and women is the same way you appeal to the white men. It's just that our threat is real and your threat is much more perceived. And obviously even my threat is much more perceived than like a Black woman or a trans person. And that's what's going on right now, right? Like that is, I really tell this story well in Un-American, so I hope people stay tuned. But there's this this character in the book who describes his own radicalization in a 75-page screed online. And he's literally choosing between Bernie and Trump because he's like, these two are activating the angry white men, and this is what's going to win. And that's also why, like, I was one of the people that knew in 2016 he was going to win because of his extremism, not in spite of it.
Right.
And I'm worried again.
I understand. I think we have some questions. I think Anthony's compiled a few questions. We might have some people in the chat. Do you mind taking some of those questions, Daniella?
Let's do it.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, everybody. Please continue to like and share the live, and please gift our panelists. And thank you again. Daniella's book is UnCULTured in the TikTok shop. If you purchase that version, it will be autographed, and you can find that direct link either through her by clicking her profile. There's also one in my LinkTree. And please join the Discord when you're over there. Thank you. Also available on Amazon, paperback and audio versions on Audible, Google Play, and Libby for libraries.
Special thanks to all of you. I see mentioning the audio, like Super Hard has a piece of my soul. Love
Sure
you
does.
so much.
Indeed.
What are your questions?
First of all, it's important to comment that my hair loves the TikTok shop. Now, this is a running joke that we have going on because, you know, hair products, as you well know, are super duper important. Thank you, TikTok shop.
And we have no shame when it comes to things like that.
Did you get free hair products from TikTok yet?
We're working on
I
it.
wish. I don't even get a sample, right? All right. So for the veterans out there, there were several people that were asking about your MOS. So I did reply intelligence officer rank captain. But I didn't know if you wanted to give any more clarity on that because that had come up several times.
So let me explain the two different, I guess, interesting things about my military career. Well, there's three. I also won a marathon in Afghanistan. But I was an intelligence officer. I was just your regular all source intelligence. We don't care that you speak three languages. We're going to send you to my exact area of expertise from my 4 years back and forth to war in the 101st Division is things that KIA helicopter pilots in Afghanistan, which made it really fun when I became the military spouse to a special operations pilot flying the most dangerous missions.
Boy.
Yeah. And I was home with baby and also government trained expert on how this can go wrong. Not fun, and then also, just because I was in the right place at the right time and was very enthusiastically voluntold that I would be one of 43 women from the 101st going into deliberate combat. And this is significant, and I get to kind of trash talk Petraeus, which is always fun. First of all, the first time I met General Petraeus, he was giving me my commission and an award for being the most physically fit woman there. And he challenged me to a push-up competition. Like, that was his response as a general to a 22-year-old was, do you think you can do more push-ups than me? And I responded, of course not, sir, even though absolutely could I. I once did 92 push-ups without stopping to prove to my husband that I was stronger than him. Yeah, I was that girl.
Damn.
Anyway,
No surprise.
so I became one of these women. So what happens is in 2010, General Petraeus names this as a counterinsurgency. Like, this is what is going on. And this is very significant. This is why he's famous, all the things, right? Well, now he's famous for other reasons. But the thing about a counterinsurgency is nobody has ever won one. Because all you have to do is outweight the people that are in your country. And so I say this is like a really interesting cult intersection with the military, because honestly, as soon as we named it a counterinsurgency in 2010, we should have been figuring out how to hightail it out of there. And we didn't. Anyways, but we did realize, well, it's really important to win the hearts and minds of the Afghans, right? And that's when you started hearing that floating around, hearts and minds. And so to do this, we have to put women onto all of the missions, not just the one where we are saying publicly that we don't expect anything to go bang. So all of a sudden, they ask us to raise our hands. They send us to 1 week of sitting down cultural sensitivity training. They kept no records of who signed up for this. And by the way, the US Army doesn't not keep records. Like, we're second only to the Germans in that. And then they sent us out untrained, without good armor, like just onto live combat missions. And I really think it was intended to fail. I mean, I honestly think that these generals believed their own pseudoscience and that it was just going to be proved wrong. We're going to lose 1 or 3 blonde officers and people are going to care. And we did lose one, Lieutenant Ashley White. And we also proved very, very quickly that when both men and women are trying to get you, it makes a lot of sense to have both men and women on your side. And I even take that argument a bit further, right? That I argue that without knowing anything about Anthony, I might be better at war than him because I have the male perspective, right? It's been shoved down our throats for forever, and it's the only way we learn war. But I also have the women's perspective, right? And so not only I don't think we are definitely not worse at war, but I think like maybe we are better. And I think we started to show that in any ways. Fort Knox was not sure what my number was, but I know because we were told over and over again, you are the first 43 women. And all of the men told us how nerve-wracking it was to speak to a room full of women. That was also like, oh, that's my other career. Like I'm always the youngest person and the only woman in the room when I'm briefing pretty much across the board. So, you know, I got to be in the right place in the right time to make history, and it's really cool. And what's really cool is haters tried to say, like, well, you're playing a real word game, aren't you? Right? Like, women have absolutely been in ground combat since the Revolutionary War. You know, Harriet Tubman was one of them. Amazing women have done amazing things. And actually have a shirt that I sell in my link that says, "We are the granddaughters of the women you couldn't ban." Right? Like we owe all of our history to these women. But the second they said deliberate combat, right? The second they said we are sending these untrained, improperly armored soldiers into enemy fire on purpose, military commanders can't do that, right? So 2 months when I was doing it on the ground probably, and they'd already created the cultural support team, a special forces assessment version for these women, and had created like a formal thing. And you actually see that in UnCULTured. Like you see me being a volunteer, and then at the end of that deployment, you see special operations trying to recruit me to go do it like formally again.
And you're not supposed to volunteer, and you did it anyway. And there, look what
right. What happens, right? You just get more.
Right.
So, you know, I'm super, super proud. On my second deployment, a year and a half later, I was a captain. I was in Bagram, and I watched the first 2 women graduate Ranger School, you know, and I tell you, like, we were just standing there bawling our eyes out. I mean, it's incredible. I recently got to meet the first woman Ranger tabbed and scrolled, which means the first woman who went through Ranger School and was in Ranger Battalion. She was their HR. And she is such a badass, Major Sydney Jacks. You should actually have her on too. And she gave me her uniform Ranger tab and was just like, thank you, right? And then I also recently talked to the highest ranking trans woman in the infantry, and she gave me this additional piece. You know, I really like to tie, so on September 20th, 2011, which was when I was deployed to Afghanistan, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell came down, right? Which was like the first ban against humans other than when we racially desegregated. So that came down. And then when we realized like, oh, that was whatever, you know, like maybe women can do it too, right? Like, and so quickly that ban going down leads to the combat ban going down, which I get to be part of. And then we realize, you know, after my career, well, like if it doesn't matter what gender you are, then it doesn't matter if we can tell what gender you are, right? And so then the trans ban came down, and to the military's credit, when Trump tried to, you know, reinstate it, it was met very negatively, right? And I think like it's hard to hate up close. Like once you train and you are, you know, brothers and sisters with that person in a war zone, like mostly you don't care about this stuff, and it's always kind of been an academic political argument in the first place. So then the trans ban came out, and you know, this major in the infantry like connected this for me, and it's so great. And then my book came out on September 20th, 11 years later, which is just, it's nice, you know. We like really made a lot of change, and obviously with organizations, especially huge ones, like there's always more. But
Have you been? Are you aware of the bear or man in the woods trend of late,
oh
Daniela?
yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was thinking about that when you brought that up. Anthony, any additional questions from our folks in the chat? And everybody, thank you again for participating. Please continue to like and share the live. We really appreciate that.
For the record, Team Bear.
Definitely Team Bear.
But that's because I'm shaped like a bear, and so I like to stick with the shape that I'm in.
hey, look, we've been live long enough that the orders are starting to roll in, so this is fun.
Awesome.
Right?
That's great.
Nice.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, so where I am with the bear thing is there's a creator I really respect called White Woman Whisperer. Please go follow her. And she said, hey, white women, if you ask a black woman who she prefers at work to walk in, a white woman or a white man, guess who she's going to pick? So I'm sitting very heavily with that right now and, asking myself what we as white women need to do to change that, because the white woman is scarier, right? Like we are their natural predator. But yeah, the bear thing is super, the most powerful thing I saw so far was like, yeah, so even if the bear unalives you, no one's going to ask you what you were wearing or,
Exactly.
what you did to deserve it. And like in my MST, I am wearing fatigues. I am armed. He is not. I am senior. He is not. And, still happens. And
Sure.
because I took off my own boots, I was never going to get help,
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, very important discussion, the bear thing. And like, I'm glad we're having it. And I'm glad that you are willing to talk about that.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. We made it very, very, we stand for human rights, and we stand for, it's, I just actually got a shirt today that says, you don't owe women don't owe you shit. And I'm going to be featuring that more and more.
There's that one. So it took me 7 years to radicalize my libertarian pilot into a like fully fledged feminist. But now he's just a walking billboard for like anti-sexism. And like he doesn't like things, but the one thing I can buy him is feminist t-shirts. Like he just went to school in a shirt that said feminism, the like crazy idea that women are humans or something, and it's just like great because he's just like such a safe man. But more importantly, and this really goes back to why I wrote this book, right? Because like I can tell these stories and it gets almost nothing. But when someone that looks like you, Steve, or like Anthony is like, no, she's right? Like you have the most powerful voices in this conversation. And the best way I ever heard that explained was women couldn't vote themselves the right to vote, so like I am fully out here with this book trying to radicalize the good men into like speaking up when these things happen.
We've had these conversations about exactly that, about it. It is people who look like us, who've been the oppressors for so long, for so many marginalized groups, that it takes us to call out other men who are doing it, because the system will never change unless we do. We've created it, therefore we have to tear it down. So,
I was just in a restaurant in my, I live in Maryland. It's very diverse. And me and my husband were in like our favorite tapas restaurant the other day. And there were only 6 other tables and everybody was white. And I was just like looking around. I was like, historically, this is not good, right? Like we are not the good guys.
That's right.
And for me, this really ties into groups, right? Because so I say like, I'm a scholar of cults, extreme groups, extremely bad leadership. I'm the expert on the bad guy. I always have been. And then people go like, okay, so then how do you build good groups? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm the expert on the bad guy. But second of all, I don't think the good groups are led by people that look like me or like you, like we know now that people that best understand systems of oppression are the people most oppressed by it,
Right.
So I think I'm the right person to lead the charge on grape culture in the military, but like probably a strong Black trans woman is going to be my best partner in like building a good organization, or like almost that same thing I was saying about like Anthony and me as soldiers. Like I only, even with my book, right? Like super long memoir, and I was still a straight white captain, so like I still just barely scratched the surface of how oppressive and damaging a military career is to like a Black woman or a gay man or, a Black gay man or a trans person, any of that. And that's another reason I'm just like, we need these stories, we need these conversations. Thank you so much.
Sure. Anthony, another question? 'Cause I've
Yeah,
got-
there was another question. Now, feel free not to answer this, but it's a question, so I agreed to read it. It's not like triggering or offensive, but slightly off topic. I'm sure that you are aware of the hastily slapped together non-ban ban, as people are calling it, for TikTok. Did you have or would want to offer an opinion, either as a creator or a former intelligence officer?
Yeah.
Great
So
question.
first of all, like I have just hit my monetization era on TikTok, which means that they are communist policing me to this like extreme level. And I'm sure you have all dealt with this too. But I'm just like, my life on TikTok, I'm just kind of watching as an organizational behavior scientist. I'm like, this is so fascinating. Like, it's so fascinating to see how they're controlling the behavior. And I'm like, yeah, like you can see like the communist, the totalitarian control, like these different things, but also capitalism does kind of the same thing to us over here. So I think it's very interesting, like forcing the switch. But also I just think, you know, like any cult. So one of my rules for good groups that are not cults is information is never bad. You know, so like when in history have the good guys tried to control information? You know, I mean, even at like secret government level, like there's so much misuse of it. And so always for me, it's like the people trying to stop the information are like they're the fundamentalists that are trying to keep the way of life. You know, even ChatGPT, for goodness sake, it's the auto-tune debate again, right? Like it exists. People are going to
Sure
use
does.
it. It's actually a great editor, you know? You can just say, find me quotes on cults. And it's like, it's a good research, it's all these different things. But like,
So professionally for me, because I'm a writer, so I have some issues with ChatGPT. We won't go there for now. That's for a different topic for a different day, but there you go.
right. But I guess I mean this sort of like this control, right? Like this
Yeah.
is kind of what we're seeing. Like they don't like what government, I think what our government doesn't like about TikTok is pretty culty. It's like they don't like that we are all just sitting here educating people for free.
Indeed.
Right? Like I went to the military, broke my mind and body to get a $50,000 Harvard degree paid for, right? But most of these people in the audience didn't. And now we're just democratizing the information. But I also think that any version of trying to control information like always fails, right? Like progress always wins, conservatism always loses eventually because change marches forward. And so part of, I guess, why I'm not scared of the TikTok thing going away is just like, we're all just gonna rebuild this on something else, you know? Like, what they don't like is not the platform. What they don't like is all of us speaking our truth to the world. And like, I'm already just starting to educate people. Like, I'll be on YouTube, right? Like, if this all goes,
on it too.
Or just if TikTok kicks me off, like, find me on YouTube.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, and you don't know this yet, but I like to do math for fun because apparently I have issues.
He's one of those people.
And what we do know about ByteDance is that they have created, you know, hundreds of algorithms for the purposes of marketing, right? And that in that space, from a mathematics perspective and machine learning perspective, they are light years ahead of every single American institution, not just social media, right? Nobody does it better than ByteDance, period. Because they got to learn from everybody else that came before them, right? And I think in essence, what this is about is that it's about protectionism. It's about isolationism. It's like McCarthy era, you know, don't let the communists, right? You know, bullshit. And I guarantee you, if we could expose every senator and congressperson's stock portfolio, I would be proven correct.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about.
Absolutely. And then also, like, let me just give you a little, like, viewpoint into the intelligence side, right? So always security and privacy are against each other, right? Like they are on a seesaw. And as humans, when we feel threatened, we rush to give up our privacy. Just like after 9/11, Department of Homeland Security, boom, right? And so we've also done this now, though, with technology. So, first of all, when I was in spy school 15 years ago, the number one disaster in the world after or before nuclear war was the internet going down for 30 days, right? We have made humans only need three things to survive: water, food, and shelter. Then we added fuel, and then we added internet, right? And like we saw a version of this in Puerto Rico when they lost internet for a week and 3,000 people died. And so all this to say, like, we've already given up privacy,
Right.
like that it's gone, right? Like we didn't realize that we were doing that with technology, just like we didn't realize with the agriculture we were changing the world forever, you know, all of these things. I just think as groups of humans, we
Sure.
often don't realize these huge shifts until it's too late to do anything about it.
We talked about this before too. It's the hypocrisy, quite frankly, because you know the Chinese government is invested all throughout America. So it's just miss me with that bullshit.
Yeah.
I wanted
So,
to
you know,
check
I
in.
always say, like, okay, if I'm teaching China how to build bad groups, then sorry. You know?
Right, right, exactly. I wanted to check in with you. You holding up okay? You good for a little while? You need a break?
I'm good. I'll probably need a break in like 15 minutes.
Sounds good. We have a guest. I want to bring him up. I think he's got a question. I know our guest, so I'm sure this question will be on topic. And if you don't mind, we'll bring up a guest and have him ask you a question directly. All right, we'll bring him up right now.
We haven't done this before.
I got you. Thank you again, everybody. This is Daniella Young. Her book is UnCULTured. We're talking about her experience in the Children of God cult, the U.S. Army. She's a U.S. Army combat vet, an author, an expert knitter. If you'd like to purchase her book, you can do so through her TikTok profile. There's also a link in my LinkTree in my bio, which links you to the TikTok shop version, which is autographed. Version is also available in paperback on Amazon, and you can get the audio version on Audible, Google Play, and Libby for librarians.
Did you say
Slugger? Well,
did you say expert knitter?
correct, I did.
Awesome.
I've been knitting this whole time.
No.
And actually, you can purchase my knitting at slow fashion prices too.
Hey now.
That
Good
is
evening, Slugger.
awesome.
This
How are you,
sweater
friend?
I'm making right now is called the Notorious RBG. And it's a black
Ooh.
sweater with huge globe sleeves, and then the collar is knitted in the white collar, and it's
That's
like
that's
I sell it for 250. I always have a wait list, and it is so worth it.
Hey
that's
now.
fantastic. I just got onto the live because I just got back home a little bit ago, and the part I heard you talking about bite dance and the upcoming alleged ban. Um, the one thing I wanted to mention that I think a lot of people forget is I suspect because Biden hasn't signed it yet, right? Or has the Senate passed it?
It just passed that if it's
Okay.
not like sold in a year, it's gonna shut down. I'm sorry.
Well, I suspect ByteDance has a few attorneys employed, or can afford attorneys, probably much better than the ones that number 45 has been trotting out to represent him. So I would suspect that some federal court somewhere is going to enjoin this until this gets reviewed at an appellate level, because everything I've heard the people defending the law say, there are problems that I don't believe the fact that there's a link to the Chinese government is going to justify them narrowing the focus on TikTok, and I have some equal protection problems that I believe the court might consider, or certainly take a look at. So there'll be longer time. I'm very surprised. I think I'm older than everybody here.
Hey, Slugger brother, I don't want to interrupt, but so we're talking about Daniella's book. I mean, if
Okay.
if you have a specific question, I just want to I want to try to stay on
Oh,
topic if we
I'm
can.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Um,
You didn't know what you were talking about. That's really okay. I mean, if you have a specific question for her,
uh,
then let's try to focus
well,
on that question.
I plan on picking it up because I am old enough to remember. There was an organization, I guess, or somebody in Florida who was linked to the Children of God. So I have heard of them before years ago, and um, somebody had mentioned that one of Trump's potential vice president selections had a link to them. We were actually talking about that today. So I'm very interested to. And you say facts. You've got a link in your tree to the book.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
In the book, and you can buy autographed copies through here. And let me tell you, like what you said is important, right? Cults are always out for political power.
Right.
Today's America, they are getting it. And that is a direct line from my next book, The Culting of America. So Children of God, I think, is one of the most successful political cult stories that nobody knows. So in the 80s, Children of God was in Time magazine with a legit harem photo, right? Bearded cult leader, 13 young women in Time magazine. This is the Schmeck's cult.
Mm-hmm.
In the 90s, they performed twice at the White House.
I
And
didn't know that.
nobody's
Wow.
telling this story. I keep trying to get like documentary producers to be like, this is the story. This is how well they whitewashed themselves, and everybody bought it. And the National Prayer Breakfast that every president goes to is owned by another cult called the Family, which is also what our cult was called. By the way, anything that calls itself your family wants to overwork you, underpay you, and expect you to put up with more BS than you would otherwise.
Makes sense.
Right? And yes, I'm putting that on a t-shirt. But like, it's, you know, the Moonies own the Washington Times.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it is so, like you said, I mean, if we could see senators'
Mm-hmm.
stocks, I mean, it is just so intertwined right now in America. And I really, you know, there's a reason I'm putting out an academic book called The Culting of America. Like, this is what we are going through right now. And it's actually a weirdly dissonant experience to have like pulled myself out of the rabbit hole of the cult, right, Steve? And then, like you said, and then join the system and actually find out that like the cult was right about a lot of stuff, you know, like America is really broken. Like, cult survivors describe it like going down the rabbit hole twice, like going out and coming out of a cult, because it's just, you see the same group behavior everywhere. And
Thanks for jumping in, Slugger. Why don't we use this opportunity? Appreciate you, bro. Thanks.
Thank you for
jumping in.
having me. It was nice meeting you. Everybody have a great evening, and I hope to talk to you after I read your book.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Slugger. Why don't we use this opportunity, Daniella, for you to take a little break? We'll be here. We'll be here when you get back.
Back.
And please just request again when you come back. We'll bring you right back up. Thank
Okay,
you, friend.
perfect.
If you click you got it. She got it. Okay. Thank you, everybody. This is going really, really well. I want to just a couple of housekeeping notes. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you very much. I want a big shout out to RTP and Felice and to Jen for helping us with that opportunity today. Not a huge audience over there. We don't care. We just appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you for the robust conversations that we've seen going on in the Discord, and also for the question that you've asked. So for the last hour, once she comes back, if there are people that have specific questions for Daniella, if you wouldn't mind letting the mods know, you can either do that
Yes.
through Discord or through the chat. And please have a specific question. And we want to make sure that we keep the questions short and on topic, and we don't want to create an environment where it just turns into a conversation. We want the questions to sort of drive the conversation.
And I'll be vetting the questions here.
Appreciate that, brother.
Via Discord. So we're not trying to police what you're saying, but this is a pretty special event, and we really want to be targeted and focused. This isn't
Indeed.
the normal grab ass session that Steve and I have for 3 hours.
Right.
Don't make me get out my towel and snap it at you, buddy.
Yeah, no, I got you, buddy. I got you. So once again, the book is entitled "UnCULTured." You've heard Daniella talking about it. For those of you that are just joining, we're featuring the author, Daniella Young, and I'll just while we're waiting for her to come back, there's some amazing things that have been said about her book. The sort of the summary of the book: escape by definition is rarely easy, and in "UnCULTured," Daniella Mestyanek Young illustrates just how difficult it can be leaving the children of God, the cult she was born into, and surviving the U.S. Army, a group she chose to enlist in as a young adult, have both left many scars. Lucky for readers, she found her way through both experiences and then wrote it all down. Multiple 5 out of 5 star reviews, one in particular entitled Best Cult Memoir Out There. From one cult survivor to another, this is the best memoir of surviving a childhood trapped by the insanity of a cult that I've ever read, and I've read them all. Daniella's writing style is simple, direct, and searingly honest. If you've been through anything similar, whether it's physical or sexual abuse, psychological manipulation and brainwashing, feeling trapped and that you have few options for safety and freedom, or the ongoing ache of developmental trauma similar to the throb of a poorly healed shin bone, then you'll find yourself tearing up throughout this book many, many times. Available again there's a link in my LinkTree. I'm assuming that's still working, everybody. Please let us know if it's not. Link in my LinkTree in my bio. Thank you, cool. In my bio, that will take you directly there. The TikTok shop version of this book will be autographed by Daniella. Also available in paperback. You had something to say, bro? Gotcha. Also available in paperback on Amazon. It's available in audio version in Audible and at Google Play, and also available in Libby in your local library. And you can find her at Group Behavior Gals Shop right here on the TikTok. This book is incredibly intense. I was introduced to Daniella a while back, and when I started reading her story, I would prepare yourself, quite frankly, for this story, because it is incredibly intense, and especially if you listen to the audio version of this book, Daniella tells the story, she narrates it, and you can even hear moments throughout the book where she's emotional, and understandably so. So why don't we bring her on right back up? So Anthony, welcome back, friend. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Anthony, are there some more questions that arose?
There is one, and I would like to invite Greg up to ask this question. He had a very pointed question, and I think sometimes it's better to bring somebody up and have them ask it.
Why don't you guys
Thank you,
engage in that, and I will be right back. Hi, Greg.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Hey, Daniella,
Hi.
former intelligence guy here, Fort Huachuca, always out front. Um, do have a question for you. In the book, PFC Parker, um, kind of how you got thrown under the bus on that. I was just curious to where do you believe that possibly when she went to the higher ups after you got the phone in the office and everything, do you think she possibly could have been coerced into kind of throwing you under the bus, maybe them thinking that they could isolate themselves or insulate themselves from the trouble? It's just when I read that, it just kind of rang through to me because I was involved in a case in Germany where it seemed like it all got twisted around to protect the aggressor and not the victim. And I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for reading my book. I just
Oh,
want to
yes,
say
ma'am.
that in the 4 years of creating this book, I was told over and over again, men will not read this book. Men do not read books by women. Like, that is publishing wisdom. And I like to think I'm teaching them about intersectionality, because I was like, soldiers read books by soldiers, and cult survivors read books by cult survivors, and there are men in those categories. And even with a baby on the cover, men are reading it. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do think that 100%. And in fact, Scott Halter, who is the commander, basically said as much to me, right? He was like, I mean, this private who had been validly harmed, but also was lying, and I knew she was lying. She was lying about things that I said. So it's just a really hard case, right? Like victims can do so many things, and I know
Yes,
this.
ma'am.
And so this colonel, right, battalion commander at war, is personally checking every day on this private, and she is at least telling, the unit was trying to do the right thing. The unit was trying
Yes,
to do
ma'am.
the right thing. And what I got told was she, one day she was fine, things were happening. Then she found out that because of her own transgression, she was going to be punished, which I don't believe in any of that. Like she was also BS of the organization. But, they just chose, and they literally said to me, like, Congress is watching and somebody has to take this hit, right? Take one for the team. And I have a chapter called that, have that on a t-shirt. And Scott Halter said, he was like, I know what happened, that her counselors, right, her unit victim advocates, all of this stuff, like they told her, if you do this complaint in this way against this person, there is nothing they can do. And part of the reason that was the beginning of me telling my story was because I was like, I get that Congress is watching. I'm glad that Congress is watching, but I'll tell my story to Congress, right? Like everything you're doing is correct, but Captain Mestyanek is not at fault for, they literally wanted me to sign a line saying that I was responsible for an environment of sexual harassment in the unit. And
Yeah, that's what I felt like. I was like, this just doesn't sound right.
yeah, and even
I'll
at the
drop down to
time,
give.
nobody could understand why I would like cancel my career over that. And so it was like, well, I have to tell you my background, and then you will get like why I can't take one for this team.
I would like to compliment how well the book is written, and you reading the book. I did it on audio, and I was in the store the other day, and when you talked about the children not being present, it absolutely it was the first time I actually understood triggered, because I found myself, I went down two different aisles because it brought back a time when I was in Somalia, when we were out on a patrol and the children weren't present. And I remember my briefings that you would have given us. And I was like, oh my God. And it just brought me back. But
Yeah.
loved the book. It was absolutely wonderful.
I'm sorry, can I still talk more to Greg? Is that okay?
Sure, please do.
Okay, so with that, right? So this is a chapter in my book. It's called Combat Barbie. Please read it. I sell the shirt in my shop, Combat Barbie. So I was filming this once, right? Like I was telling this story about being in the village and noticing the children, and a man who kind of looked like you, Greg, was filming. And he stopped the film and he said, okay, I'm former special operations. You mean to tell me that none of the men noticed? Because we get briefed on that every time, right? And I was like, I swear, Greg, this is going to be part of the way I tell the story forever.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. I'm the one that briefed you, right? Like I know
Absolutely.
we got briefed all the time. And still, we don't know if they were going to notice. I can tell you it would have taken me 1,000,000 years to notice that the sand looked funny, so it's just like we're noticing different things. And it was 100% because I was a woman. I was wanting to see children because I was spending 12 months not seeing children unless I left base. And this little thing of like when the Afghan girls noticed that I was a woman soldier, their faces would light up, and that spoke to me. And so I didn't see that, and I'm like, boom. But you never could have asked me what that was going to be, right? Like, so I say, like, this is the importance to like having a seat at the table. Like
Yes,
as
ma'am.
the intelligence officer, I could only do so much to help you notice that. But as a woman on the team, like we got it right away.
This one. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. My wife was Air Force, so we're both veterans.
Amazing.
Tell your husband 160th Night Stalkers don't quit.
Before you
But they do
drop,
retire, as
Yes,
my
sir.
husband
Yes,
will
sir.
say.
I say before you
Yes,
drop,
sir.
Greg, to everybody who's listening, I just would like to give Greg a shout out because he's part of our team as an absolute critical member of what we do here. He's helped produce content. He's helped produce backgrounds. He's our Discord manager, and he's just an all-around great guy. And I'm honored to have you on my team, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And please tell
And
your
I'm a mutual of Danielle.
Yeah, and
I know
please
that.
tell your wife thank you for her service, because women veterans don't hear that enough.
Indeed.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, brother. Have a good night. Be well.
You too.
Okay. I thought maybe for this part of our conversation, I'd like to kind of, if it's okay with you, Daniella, I want to shift specifically to extremism. I know we've touched on it in varying ways, but I want to go back to the fact that we're living in the era of MAGA. And we're living in the era of misinformation. We did an entire live dedicated to that, Russian propaganda and misinformation, and how we now know we can trace certain conspiracy theories that originate in Russia, go to China, end up on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, and the danger behind that. We see, I don't mean to generalize, but I think we can make some generalizations about the type of person that we see in MAGA. You talked about angry white men earlier. We see common traits. We see the susceptibility of young white men falling into that sort of cult, hole, pit of despair and anger. So we always try to find, again, we had another conversation recently about people who've got MAGA in their family, for example. And the common theme for people who do, the topic was about reconnection. Like, can we reconnect with people? When you're 10 toes down on defending human rights, and you've got a person in your family that doesn't give a shit about human rights because of the ideology that they have, most people felt obligated to reconnect with their family members. So can you sort of, from your perspective as an expert on cults and extremism, can you sort of help at the layman's level unpack MAGA? And what is the draw?
All of it.
I know we've touched on it from various angles, but maybe if you could synthesize it a bit.
And I do want to say, like, when I release Un-American, can we come back and have this conversation
Please,
again?
absolutely,
Like,
yes.
It's so relevant.
Yes.
And in Un-American, Scott Halter, our hero mentor from UnCULTured,
Indeed.
says to me what a mentor says to him before: where we sit is where we stand. And from the children of God, those of us that came back to America, whether we ended up in urban centers, we are blue liberals, and where we ended up in red centers, many of them are MAGA. So I mean, we are all very actively dealing with what you're saying. And I think this, like, where we sit is where we stand, is important. And in the next book, I'm trying to explore, like, if I hadn't gone inner city Houston to big Dallas college, would I have ended up being the extremism expert for the other side, right? It's so fascinating. It's so interesting. But one of the things is cults weaponize your discontent. And that really is, I think, the ultimate secret to MAGA, right? And another really important thing is, like, cults operate on a bait and switch. And the problem right now is everybody, I mean, angry white men especially, are starting to see the bait and switch, the con of the American dream promise, right? Because the promise to people that look like you and people that look like me are, if we uphold white supremacy, we'll be better off. And honestly, like, I think the way I talk about cults is really relevant to DEI education, because I talk about the sacred assumption, right? In the children of God, we believed that this random dude was the prophet of God. And as long as we believed that, we could justify anything. Where MAGA is at, you mentioned my first rule of cults. First rule of cult is you're never in a cult. My second rule of cults is they'll forgive any sin, Prince Andrew, except the sin of leaving.
Oh,
Harry and Meghan. And the third is where we are with MAGA, which is even if he did it, doesn't mean he's guilty.
Right.
Right. And so really interestingly, unpacking this starts with cognitive dissonance, which comes out of cult studies in the 1950s, when we still think humans are rational. We still think brainwashing works like a magic switch, all these different things. And this psychologist sets out to basically prove cognitive dissonance. He just doesn't know that that's what it is. But he hypothesizes that there's this doomsday cult and they've predicted a date, right? So it's December 21st, 1953, I think, the world's going to end. So he's like, well, when the world doesn't end, I predict not everybody is going to go home. And that flew in the face of what we thought about brains and rationality and everything at the time. So he goes and embeds with this cult, super dangerous, by the way. Do not try this at home. A journalist did, and now he's MAGA. And he goes and he embeds with them, and sure enough, right, not even half of the people go home. They not only do they not go home, but they double down harder in their recruitment. And I kind of address this a little bit in UnCULTured, where it's like with Y2K, the adults kind of want it to be the end of the world, right? Because that justifies all of your deprivation and all of your self-sacrifice and your exploited labor, which are all hallmarks of the cult. It was for something. And so Leon Festinger names cognitive dissonance, which is said to be one of the like most useful social science concepts in history. And he finds that there's like a distinction of the kind of the people that burned all their bridges and went all the way in are the ones that don't leave. This is my grandfather, but this is also what I call the Rudy Giuliani, right? Like Rudy Giuliani is no longer going down in history as America's mayor, right? Yeah. He's going down in history as the old man standing in front of Total Seasons 4 landscaping with dye running down his face, correct, right? And he cannot change that. He can never go back to being known as America's mayor. Right. So he has to go down with the Trump ship. You know, he does. And so I've actually added recently to my model, like entrance costs as part of exit costs, right? So we always say the number one thing people will say, if you call their group a cult, they'll say, we're not a cult, you're free to leave anytime. And I always say, I didn't ask if it was a prison. Exit costs are, I describe everything you lose when you leave the group. I also like Taylor Swift's description of like, we can't be friends, so I'll pay the price of what I lost and what it costs now that we don't talk, right? Like everything. And psychologists estimate it's as close as we can feel to death. And so like, I went through that when I was 15, you know, there's a reason you only got a little bit of the view of me leaving the cult because I just didn't even know how to talk about it yet. I mean, it's such a crazy, hard experience. I couldn't have even described like how many people I was going to lose writing the book, you know, and it's not the ones you think. And so it is so hard, but sorry, getting back to answering the question, right?
That's okay.
So people are getting, right, literally radicalized into MAGA. Like this is what is happening. This is a process of extremism. We know how it works. We see it happening. The largest terror threats around the globe right now are all fundamentalist movements, right? Like across the board. This is the problem. This is what's going on. And a lot of it, to me, comes back to that like discontent piece, right? And it sounds so frou-frou and non-academic, and this is not who I am, but like a gratitude practice is so important, right? Because like I just try to live my life with as few pain points as like somebody can crank up. And I also give you the advice that like when someone educates you on a problem and then sells you a solution, be very, very wary, right?
Sure.
But also
sure.
by my
Right.
And so, you know, this is all just coming together with MAGA, right? And the final thing I'll just say here to help people understand it is we think from the outside, we think of extremism as horrible and rightfully so. But I compare this to like people who've never smoked that can't understand why people smoke. And it's like, because it feels good.
Sure.
Right? Extremism feels good, right? Tony, think about being in the military. It feels great to be surrounded by people that look like you and dress like you and like confirm for you in a very confusing world, because this is when we see cults, that you're on the right track. You know, so like I was saying about when I joined the army, I could just like fall forward into the comfort of the army. Like that's what MAGA is giving to these Americans right now. And they are under threat because their way of life is being pulled down. Right. So it's a real threat. It's a real fear. But every single person who's lived under any kind of totalitarianism is like watching this happen.
We often we often draw the, and I'll get you in 1 second, Anthony. We often draw the connection to fascism because if you literally go through the 14 tenets, they talk about scapegoating, suppression of liberal ideas, the supremacy of the military, all the various tenets of fascism. You can literally check a box every single time. So when we have conversations that get heated with people that are in MAGA and we refer to their beliefs as fascist, they don't understand, they don't make the connection because, like you've said, it's an indoctrination, it's sense of belonging, like I need to be a part of something, so I share in your hatred, I share in your anger, I share in your your attacks on marginalized groups. So
And
seeking
this is
something
why
out.
I think so. Like one thing we know is that the most powerful way to get someone to recognize coercive control is to see it recognize it in a parallel problem. Right. And that's kind of, I mean, my entire publisher's strategy was like, you can sneak UnCULTured into a MAGA household because it's a story about a girl in a cult who becomes a captain, right? Like, it sounds like a hero story, but it's actually going to beg them to question themselves. And that's like really what I try to do, how I try to break it down. Because if we talk about it at too high of a level, it's hard to understand. But when I'm like, this is an extremist tactic, and then this is what your group is doing, right? And you can kind of just sit back and like point that out to people,
We're speaking with Daniella Young. Her book is entitled UnCULTured. We're talking about that this evening. There is a link to her account in the TikTok shop specific to this particular version, which will be autographed by her. Also available in Amazon paperback version, on Audible and Google Play, and Libby for librarians. And Anthony, I think there might be another question.
I got three things. Also, my wife ordered the book, and Steve, she does say hi. Mods, my wife also says hi, as I have to share her now with all of the mods. I bought the "If It Quacks Like a Cult" shirt because you had it in fat old man sizes, so I appreciate that. I don't know if Happiness Seeker is in the queue, in the request queue, but there is a question I think needs to be asked directly. And there we go.
I'm on it. Good evening, Happiness Seeker. Thank you for joining us tonight. Do you have a question?
Hey, yeah, hi, Daniela. It's nice to actually be able to talk to you. I ordered a book a few weeks ago for my daughter, who is active duty Navy, and you were so sweet and autographed it to her. So thank you so much for that. But I'm curious if you have any specific advice. She's 21 and left, high school and enlisted, and thankfully she's close to home. But I'm curious if you have any specific advice for a young girl. She's got 3 more years on staying safe and being smart.
Yeah. So thank you to your daughter for her service. So much, right? And like, we need strong military. We are just getting to 20% now, which means we're at the tipping point for stereotype threat, right? Like, things are happening. Women like your daughter are going to, like, I think, be the final change. But also, like, I don't want it to be my daughter. And so my heart just goes out to all women associated with the military, and I'm glad that she's close to home. And, my biggest advice is, like, it's one of my cult pieces of advice, like, information is never bad. So her getting out there, right? Of course, I think reading my book, because I really tell it like it is. There's other books by military women that I'm happy to recommend to you and her. One of the things I really recommend to women deciding to join the military or already on active duty, same thing I give veterans, but it's like, you need to find 2 kinds of mentors. You need to find, like, let's say a woman like me that has been there and done it and is 15 years ahead of you and can tell you like some big things. And then you need to find someone like in the job that you're trying to do, or just like right above your daughter, and just like another woman that gets it and also go Army beat Navy.
Yeah, it's super important. Just really quickly, you know as well as I do, for those who are in the academies, especially in the Army, while they're all out rucking and sucking it up and embracing the suck all summer, right? Especially those trying to Ranger qualify, they're not necessarily coming in at the weight for football that they need. So that's the truth behind the matter, because the Navy doesn't have to do that, right? So they're not dropping 40 pounds because they're humping a 50-pound pack in the beautiful, delicious Georgia weather.
Yeah.
Or hot Texas weather.
No, I think not for nothing. One of the reasons that we would talk about in the Army was like all of the Navy's huge winning streak was all during the war. And it's just safer to join the Navy than the Army in that war. And so if you're like a talented football player and you want to play for the Army, for the military, you're going to go to the Navy, right? So we just actually had a harder time recruiting because of what we do versus the Navy.
100%.
Tribalism between the branches is like such an interesting, important topic here too.
It is, and here's a
Sounded
funny
like
aside.
a little bit of an excuse for losing on the football field. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there, but that's what fans do. I get it.
when I first joined the special boat unit, the United States Army was still in charge of the small boat crafts for the military. And so there was a brief moment. I've got to find the picture because I look like such an idiot. I've got a black beret, a green blouse, green trousers, and jump boots on. But the tab on the blouse says U.S. Navy, and people would look at me like, bro, what's with the hat? And I'm like, one, it's a beret. Be careful. Because I don't know how the Army, like, that is the most ridiculous uniform thing to have to try to wear. But anyway.
I was so sad when the beret went away because I look good in a beret. But anyway.
It can hide a bad hair day for sure.
It's hard to look good as a woman in uniform because they make it that way. So like beret versus soft cap, like, I look better in a beret than a baseball cap. But yeah,
yeah.
No, you're describing that like your mismatch of uniform, and I'm like, somebody would totally call him like stolen valor, and it's really like, no, you just don't understand like the cult mixing that is going on right now.
Yeah,
it's like a bad salad.
Hey, by the way, I'm going to say this very cryptically because I want to make sure that this is okay. This is, again, not a triggering thing. But when people are going to purchase your book, and many people have clearly been purchasing your book, capitalism has taken hold at the TikTok shop, and your book is at a reduced rate. So I don't know if you're aware, but that is happening right now. So
I can tell I still get the full price for the book.
Yes.
Put those discounts in, and so
yes.
Sorry, I didn't. Was that your question, or?
Well, I was just trying to kindly encourage people to hurry up and go buy the book, A, so that you get paid, and B, if they're tight on funds, there's a discount.
Yes. And let me say, like, any way that you support an author's work other than pirating it benefits the authors, right? Even libraries, right? Libraries buy 5 formats of my book. The more you request it, the more they buy. So it's all amazing. The TikTok shop currently benefits me the most monetarily. Also, let me just share emotionally, right? Because, like, I still get triggered to these bad places, you know, like I still get taken back to like a basement 6 years old with that bad guy, or to like a tower in Afghanistan thinking about jumping off. And I think like UnCULTured really is this ultimate story of like loneliness. And like, that's why we join cults, right? Like we're just lonely. And now like, you know, so already when the book came out and thousands of people have bought it, like I'm not alone anymore, right? Like I'm so honored that so many people have walked through this incredibly hard, intense story that I think changes you forever, because it's helped me not be alone. And now that I'm like autographing people's books on TikToks, like I have names. Like I have names of people that I can just picture are like helping me get through these really, really hard traumas in my life. So thank you to all of you, like every single reader, audiobook listener, and Steve and Anthony, both of you, just
Here.
It's changed my
No,
life.
thank you. I actually have a YouTubian question.
Okay.
Quite a question.
I think one of the first ways that I knew that my first husband was gonna be the bad guy in the story was when he told me that all social programs were wrong. They're all redistribution of income. And I'm like his 19-year-old girlfriend going like, I literally would be on the street if not for, you know, this social program. And like, I would have lived below the poverty level my entire life without student loans and grants and all of that stuff. I mean, not me specifically, I would have figured it out, right? But I might have. And instead, like 1 year of me paying taxes paid back what I got from, like 1 year of taxes as an Army officer paid back what I got from student loans. And now I'm paying taxes for the rest of my life, right? So just that right there, like it's an amazing social program.
Sure.
But, and then secondly, I like to say, like, I did go to war to pay off my student loans, you know, like I always say, I sold my body twice to pay for college. Once was working at a Little Shorts restaurant to literally pay as I was going. And then once was joining the Army to pay off the rest of the loans. And to tell you which culture was better, I don't think it was the Army. But, and I still want everyone to have their student loans forgiven, right? Like I when I see those memes that are like, I marched for free college and it's Army boots. And then you're like, and then you don't want our young people to not have to sign up to potentially die, but to 100% for sure break themselves physically and mentally just to pay for college. And I also, like, I'm just becoming more and more skeptical that it's like, I mean, first of all, the military proves that socialism works. Part of why I am approaching wealthy is because my husband and I have never in our lives had to pay for medical care, education. We don't even pay property taxes now, right? I mean, it works. And I also don't think like, you know, sometimes I look at the anti-college debate and I'm just like, fine. Don't educate your citizens. Just don't come to me when we're not a significant force in the world anymore, right? Like, this is the future. What are we doing? And then finally, obviously, like demonization of education is such
100%
a tactic. And it's also like the student loan debate is so you knew what you signed up for, you know? And like, really? Does an 18-year-old know what they signed up for in literally anything on earth?
No.
No.
Do we take 18-year-olds seriously for anything other than you can go to war, get married, and like sign your life away with money?
Exactly.
Well, we knew it all when we were 18.
I still know it all.
Of course you do.
No, I don't. Hey, really quick.
I have to
sure.
insert my Lord and Savior, Lord and Taylor line here, which was like, how can I know everything at 18 but nothing at 22?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The professor is in the box and would like to come up and ask a quick question. As a reminder to folks, we are putting questions through to the mods. I am vetting those questions and then addressing as needed. So, yeah.
Hey,
Good evening,
Danielle.
Professor. How are you? Thank you for joining tonight.
So, Danielle, it's the first time you and I have been in a chat together, but I'm very excited to speak with you and very happy to be one of your mutuals. But let's intersect our different fields of research because since I study firearms and cults seem to be drawn to like firearms, especially if you look at a lot of the religious cults like Scientology or groups like the Branch Davidians or things like that. Why do you think they tend to militarize?
So one, can we please get together offline and like have this conversation for more time? Because I 100% think the children of God, like the children of God went international to save themselves and it was the right move, but that's the only reason we were not also a gun cult, right? I mean, we absolutely would have been. I just think it just like cults are about power, right? Like at the end of the day, it's labor, it's power. And obviously weapons tie into that. They're also about politics, like they want political power, and weapons are going to tie into that. It's also about fear, you know, like if your people are armed and marching security around your compound, it's going to be pretty hard for them to believe that there's not a threat out there, right? So it's like, and then cult leaders are, of course, very good at playing up the threat, right? So now you're getting harassed by the government because you're stockpiling weapons, but that's not the way the cult is telling it to you, right? Like, it's just like, this is this harassment. And then the final thing that I have just off the top of my head about this, and let's make sure we give the nod to the branch of the Moonies that's not even Christian, but that now uses the iron rod in the Bible to say that it's a rifle, and they bring rifles to church. I mean, and I don't think that's that different from evangelicals right now either. So the final thing I was going to say there is, like, you know, we see cults die in two ways. One of them is when they fail to recruit or keep the next generation, go Children of God, and hopefully MAGA right now. But the second one is when they like go up in flames. And I believe a cult leader, if given enough time and isolation and power, will always precipitate their own apocalypse. And I honestly don't even know if I can say this on TikTok, but the way I describe this is the same way that same reason that you sometimes fake a schmorgasm, right? It's like you're building. And whether it's real or not, you eventually have to have a climax. And so we see this 100% with Waco, 100% with all of the other, like, you know, schmooicide cults, which Waco obviously was too. And yeah, I think it's like this weird mix of they're going to precipitate their own apocalypse, but they also very significantly, Jim Jones did not die of drinking the Kool-Aid. Jim Jones died of to the head, right? So they don't actually drink their own Kool-Aid, but they do often get trapped in their own like extremism at the end. Right. So my favorite rumor.
Heaven's Gate comes to mind, I think. Wasn't that the other one? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, my favorite rumor is that the leader of the Children of God was just left in a hole in Portugal to die of syphilis by himself with one person, and he could not go to the doctor. So he died of a very painful, easily cured STD after starting a pedo cult. Like, because he got caught in his own trap. And I don't think that's actually true, but it's my favorite rumor, you know?
I want to, for those in the chat that may not know, the Moonies, right? They are a group that worships guns, basically. So you can Google them. They're in Texas now, for those listening. They wear bullet crowns and prominently feature AR-15s in all of their religious groups. They originally started, I want to say, in Pennsylvania. Left there and went to Texas. I teach that in my Guns and Society course at FSU.
And Ben, I'm sure, or Dr. Dowd probably, I'm sure that I got stuff to say about this, and I get into this in Un-American, which I'm going to release soon, but it's like with guns in American culture, you're also blending violence and sexuality. And you cannot separate out like the sexuality of Americans with guns.
So that's a good segue for about next week. And I'm going to drop, because my newest paper is called Size Matters, Penis Dissatisfaction, and Gun Ownership in America. And I'll be here next week to talk about that. But I'm going to drop. Danielle, it's a pleasure. I'll message you.
I really want to read that paper.
It's in the American Journal of Men's Health. It'll be out in like 2-3 weeks. We just got the acceptance last night. So yeah,
I will make some videos knitting and reading parts out loud, I am sure.
Yeah, it's the second one. The first one was sexual dysfunction and gun ownership when hard data meet a limp theory. So this is our second one.
Oh, you are literally my favorite human in this moment right now. I actually plan to write a novel when I get the time, and it's called Every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and it's kind of like three men like through a made-up history as though the dicks were real men. And just the research on this is going to be fascinating. So Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Thank you for that
Thanks,
segue
Ben.
plug. Congratulations. We'll see you next week, brother.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you for having me, Danielle. It was great to talk with you, and I'll message you later.
And just
Thank you,
to,
Professor.
like, for me to reiterate this in 3 words, right? In every cult, it's sex, power, and labor.
Yep.
And that is always the answer to all of these things, including why do we always see like the grape of the children? And I believe, not just in cults, but like literally in our society, that if you can do that and walk away, you are powerful, right? Like this is you are Harvey Weinstein, you are R. Kelly, you are, and that's why like it's not even about schmecks. It never is, right? It's about power.
Yeah.
Got another question if you're willing to
Go for it.
answer. The question is, have you been asked or stated whether children of God have tried to stop you from writing the book or discussing things? And that's been asked several different ways. So sorry if people who were asking if I got that wrong. I was trying to cobble 3 different questions into one.
So, totally great. Good question. Let me say, in the data that we don't have about cults, we believe that 90% of people eventually leave their cults. That's good news for all of us. Not all of us, for most of us. My grandfather still runs the money for Children of God, right? So Thomas Mestyanek still is that person. And I don't think like he'll just ever be redeemed. He's the Rudy Giuliani. They have not tried, like I have officially contacted them and said, because, for example, I was a child actress. I was all these things. You can just, oh my God, there's a video of me and 6 white children rapping apocalypse Bible verses in downtown Rio when I'm 10. So I've asked them to like cease and desist and I just get nothing and whatever. But also, the Children of God is a pretty limp cult.
No pun intended.
2009, they kind of said, just kidding, we don't actually know when Jesus is coming back. So all of you now 60 and 70-year-old people who've devoted your life to this, just go home, go get jobs, put your kids in school, all the things we told you not to do, but you can still be in our church and send us money online. And so like, it basically kind of fell apart. There are still 1,400 members. They still bring $1 million a year. Yes, I know this because I'm actually a good spy. I sourced their 2021 year end. They still brought in $1 million during COVID. So yeah, these cults, I mean, oh my God, we made so many millions of dollars for them. But they still exist. They haven't tried to do anything, you know. I think ultimately, like, bullies are cowards. The cult won't come debate me. The military won't come debate me, right? It's just ignore, never complain, never explain. I have had the most issues with fellow cult survivors, whether that is on the Children of God side or whether that is on the kind of like vet bro side. I don't have very many issues with veteran women. They're all just like, get out of my journal, psychic. Like we had the same life. And I have wonderful healing experiences with veterans like you and, you know, other people who've asked questions today, but I get very attacked. I just recently was accused of falsifying my military experience, and like, I'm maybe one of the women whose military experience has been written the most about, but like, you just get all of those things. But I also think like the truth of when you speak out against any kind of cult is that, so the attacks are emotionally super hard. I'm actually dealing with that right now and putting on my happy face. And you can't talk about it and you can't get help really, but everyone from the outside can see what's going on. So that's what I remind myself is that like emotionally, it really sucks that I can't trust my fellow survivors to be my community, but my actual community, whether that's online or in person, like they all know what's happening. Like when you speak out about a cult, or I mean, just when people are like, don't read her book, right? Never in history have the good guys been the ones like banning books or trying to shut people up.
Exactly.
So I say, both. It's like, well, they can't do anything to me. Nobody knows where I get my power,
this
so
point.
they can't figure out how to stop me.
Right.
But they definitely, both military and the cult, know how to sucker punch me very emotionally, and that is hard.
You mentioned when you were talking to Ben, the Branch Davidians in Waco came up, and there's an interesting piece in your book where you talk about that. It was almost sort of like we acknowledge the Branch Davidians, but because of the false prophet of David Koresh, was it lack of respect for their belief system, but yet you were aware of, as much as you could be aware of, what happened, how the system did what they did to the
Right.
Branch Davidians. Can you
Yeah,
unpack that a little bit?
because, in any cult, in I think most religions, but like you have to be the ultimate right one, right? So in
Sure.
Children of God, it was kind of like, well, all Christians are more right, but we are the rightest Christians, right? So like we
Right.
are the elite army of God, and all of the rest of you are like in the basement shining shoes. That was literally how they
Right.
of heaven, right? And so, but David Koresh specifically, like that was part of our argument about why we were in a cult. And let me pause here and say, anyone that tells you why they are not a cult, always say like
Right.
good groups don't have to tell you why they're not a cult. Like they never have to say the phrase, we're not a cult because. It's the same way I don't usually have to be like, I'm not a cult leader. Like, it's just obvious. But blah blah blah, Waco, right? So it was
Yeah.
literally because he thinks he's Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Cult. And he had a specific a type of schizophrenia, by the way. Our guy doesn't think he's Jesus. He knows he's God's prophet, not cult. But
Right.
also, look what America does to groups that they think are cults, right? Look what America does to children specifically. So here I am as a 6-year-old, just like, I'm going to die if I go, and I'm going to die if I stay,
Right.
And let me tell you, the first time I drove through Waco, Texas, I just expected it to be an apocalypse zone.
Well,
14-year-old me in my mind still expected just like all of Waco to just be like a commune still smoking. Because that was literally just like
barbed
the
wire,
only association
police tape.
that I
Yeah.
ever had with it. And I do just want to say, like, Waco's another one that gets really, really into like the cult wars. And people try to be like, well, it was wrong on both sides and the FBI, blah, blah, blah. But two things, like he was marrying and raping 11 and 12-year-olds, right? Like he was a bad guy.
Right.
He also very, very recordedly, when they knew they were coming, right? Like it wasn't a surprise. It was supposed to be, but it wasn't. And he looked up and said to his people, it is coming. So this is like that man was going down with that ship, probably in fire, regardless of what the FBI and the ATF did. Right? Like harm was caused on both sides, but like my opinion of Waco is ultimate cult leader was going to go down with his ship.
Yeah, little blaze of glory, as they say. I want to, if we can, and we don't have a ton of time left, but I've been wanting to ask this question. The loneliness epidemic, right? In particular, going back to white men again. We were recently talking about trends politically and ideologically, and how overwhelmingly so America's more liberal, just by design, by definition. And yet you see the growth of women in particular becoming more and more liberal at a much higher rate. Men still becoming more conservative as they get older, but not as accelerated, with the exception of 18-year-old men. They're becoming more conservative. So when we talk about indoctrination, they seem to be the most susceptible, perhaps. And do you see that as a threat?
So I will say one thing is that pollsters are incredibly bad at capturing the reality of the youth, just like at all, right? Like we never really predict it. I will say that 59 million votes are swinging between last election and this election, with basically old people dying off and young people turning 18.
Right.
And I am out there talking to all of these 18-year-olds on TikTok, as you are. And like, they're telling me that they're not voting for the red guys, right? Like, they're writing, there's a whole genre of deconstruction music that I said this in The Atlantic, that I literally categorize as like these kids looking at their white Christian Republican dads and saying, you told me all my friends were going to hell, so F you, I'm going with them. Right. And so I actually think I think we're going to see women, right? Like, no group in society has ever given back rights without a fight. And I'm really hoping that like women are going to fight as the vote. I also think like maybe it's not as bad with the extreme youth as we're being told. But it is a real threat. It is, you know, they're easily radicalizing this genre of men right now in America. I love that you called out the loneliness, and I think this is probably a really good place to kind of wrap, because that is like one of the things that not only was happening, right? Like, I think we are coming to the end of what isolationism in your culture means, right? I mean, we sat through COVID and we watched ourselves kill each other because we couldn't even think about putting the group first, right? Which is so like weird and culty in its own way. But I mean, COVID, so fascinating, right? So I always say, like, I grew up in loneliness and isolation and all of this. And then I published a book at the time when everyone in the world had just been through absolute loneliness and isolation, and like really seeing what the reality is of just losing your community, right? So, and COVID was very effective at getting people out of cults, because people couldn't physically go to their coercive groups, and they started to realize.
That's interesting.
So that was really cool. COVID also completely changed the game for getting people into cults, as the internet in general has, right? So when my grandfather in 1972, when you wanted to isolate an American citizen, you pretty much had to take them to your compound in Texas or Brazil to isolate them, right? There were 3 television channels that all Americans watched. And, you know, it was like you could be on polar opposite sides of an issue, but you still shared the same reality, right? And now, like, you know, there are people that are very important in my life that barely even know about, like, me on TikTok, right? You know, like, we just have such different realities. And I mean, President Obama spent his last speech in office talking about this, right? The danger of silos, the danger of isolationism. And now we have introduced AI, right? So humans build systems to be smarter than groups, but then we build the bias into it. And not we have introduced AI, mostly angry white men have introduced AI. And so it's getting really scary and weird. And, you know, we see on like the cult of One Taste, the literal schmorgasm cult, a woman who's in her room, in her family's house, and she's in a cult, and they know she's in a cult, and there's nothing they can do, you know, because you don't need physical isolation anymore to absolutely isolate someone. And that is, so there's 2 things that have been found to make you susceptible to a cult. And that is being a seeker, which I will argue to the day I die is a good thing, right? You're realizing social systems don't work. You're having the hard conversations. You're trying to answer life's big questions. You read a lot of books. And the second
Would you also
thing,
say curious? Seeker, would you also say curious? Okay.
right, curious, an adult learner, right? Second thing, though, is a lack of social connections. And when people ask me, like, what can I do to make myself or my kid like more immune to a cult? I'm like, have many different social groups and make sure they are not all connected to each other. And we know from a high level Scientology recruiter who, like, they maybe have the best of the cult recruiting, and even more than the army. And he said, like, the number one thing that stopped them from getting their hooks into someone is in that very first encounter a friend or somebody else they know saying, no, this is crazy, let's go. You know, and it's really, really hard to get completely taken away by a cult if you have an active social system of people who can challenge you, and it's very diverse. So that's the good news.
Okay. Anthony?
I made an error and forgot to tell you there was someone in the box that did have a question that I would like to bring up. Sorry, that's my bad.
Okay. Is that Jen and Grayson?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. And we'll after this we'll close and we'll wrap up. Oh, she left. They left. That's okay. Okay.
My fault.
It's all right. No worries. No problem.
Okay,
So
hopefully-
she's a former naval officer, and so dang it. Okay, my bad. That would have been a good. It probably would have been a really.
Oh, here she
Back. Because we have the best mods on TikTok.
comes.
Dang, that was
Hi,
fast.
Such a great experience.
hello, gentlemen. My question, I've got a few, but mainly I'm just curious. I know you talked a lot about harassment in the military, and I get that. I think it was from your perspective as a Army officer. Did you do research on like the other military forces, or was it just from your perspective in the Army?
So the book I have out now, UnCULTured, is my memoir. It is just my life story from my eyes, my experience. So it's not a research book. It's completely separate from like my actual expertise. I will tell you that I have had women of every generation of veteran and every service reach out and be like, "Yep, 100%." And I have done other kinds of statistical research. Like I did a 2-year survey on whether women get thanked for their service. And the answer is basically absolutely no. I did, while I was writing this book, I was in Harvard doing my graduate degree in organizational psychology. And I did quite a few projects on women in the military. And there's one on my website, www.uncultureyourself.com. And it's called Nice Girls Don't Join the Army. And it's my research of like trying to use their arguments to prove why their arguments are wrong. So I mean, I would say yes and no. Like my book out there, my current book is my experience, but I think I have been in the world of speaking to women veterans for the past almost 10 years. And I haven't had too many of them say like, this is not at all what it's like.
Okay. Yeah, I belong to a female Navy officers Facebook group, and it was started probably about 10 years ago. It was actually started by the vice CNO of the Navy, but he has no control. Like, it's not a man's Facebook group. It's purely all female Navy officers, and we've got some transgender women there or men in there too that were women, and then they did the trans. They did all of the stuff to become a man, but they're still in our group. And I guess for me, like, I was harassed. I was never like, I never felt in fear of my life. I came into the Navy at a time when tailhook was just like, it had just happened, and I wanted to become a naval aviator, and I eventually did. But Anthony and I have talked about this, where like when I got to flight school and I got into my squadron and all of that, I ended up quitting. I ended up quitting everything for flying because I was one of 5 females, and it was a very harassing environment. So I definitely agree with that. I'm just curious because I'm retired as well. I was retired 4 years ago, but when I retired, I had a lot of issues going on, but the main thing was Trump had gotten elected, and at least from my perspective, in my small community that I was part of, I did meteorology and oceanography, and there was only 210 average naval officers that are in that community. But from what I saw it's like people that you had known and grown up through the ranks with, their true colors came out, and that's what I saw. It wasn't necessarily harassing, it was very subtle, but that's kind of where I was at. But it's funny because I was never I never felt unsafe, I guess. And so that's what I'm curious about with a lot of younger sailors, because I was enlisted too. And I, I have I mentee a lot of young sailors still to this day. And
Jen, I
my
don't mean
thing
to
is, I just
interrupt.
want to,
Did you have
I'm
another
sorry.
question
And let
specifically
me,
No,
for
no,
Daniela?
yeah, let me just
no,
say
it was
for
mainly
sure,
that.
for sure, 100%, I would bet my entire career and every dollar I ever made on the fact that we know the Marines are the worst, and then the Army, and then the Navy, and then the Air Force, as far as like women, the experience they're gonna have. And this is part of why I say that's why we know it's a culture problem, right? In the same way that just in the Army, we know that like you will have the worst experience if you go to Fort Liberty, which used to be called Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, I can't forget what they changed it to, or Fort Campbell, which is where I was sent. So I
Yeah.
even know that I probably would have had a completely different career if I hadn't been sent to an infantry base where I was 10% of the population and deployed where I was 5% of the population, right?
I
If
would
I
agree
had
with that.
just, even my
My only,
experience in
yeah,
intel school, women are 50% of
yes.
intel enlisted and officers. And it's very, very different. It's not the same danger feeling. You feel much more respected, all of that.
I agree with that. My only other question, Anthony kind of asked the question that it was talking about TikTok and your ideas on it. But my thing is, just as a METOC officer, meteorology and oceanographer in the Navy, and we worked hand in hand with the intel officers in the Navy. We fall under the same warfare community in the Navy. And I know, at least for us and even the intel community, we use 80% of our intel comes from open source intel. I don't know the actual number. I'm just throwing that out there. And
Yeah.
so that's where I'm just like, if they ban TikTok, I guarantee you that our intel officers are using TikTok as an open source intelligence truth, I guess, to
Is
you
there a
know,
question in there? Is there a question in there, Jen?
no, I'm just asking, like, I guess what I was saying is like, when I was trying to ask the question earlier is like, what do you think about that? Like the TikTok ban, I understand you kind of went over it, but like the fact that our intel officers use open source intel, which is basically the newspapers, the AP, everything, as majority of their intel. So if we ban TikTok, what are intel officers going to actually use?
Yeah,
Like, I know you can't answer that, but
I don't think banning TikTok changes much in the like intelligence and security world. And for what you were saying, right? Like 9/11 was planned with 100% open source information. Part of what we did in Intel school was do things like plan a hypothetical attack on the London Olympics, right? Just like all with open source information. I definitely don't think like that's not going to change. This is just the current platform that's best at information mining. But like I used to take my soldiers into the parking lot and we would learn everything we needed to target a human from the stickers on their car and what we could see through the window. And just bringing back to what I said before, like we've given up privacy for security, and that's always a change. That when we're threatened, we give up privacy, and when we're not threatened, when we're threatened, we give up privacy, and when we're not threatened, we want privacy. And we are kind of, I think, in the apex of privacy is just gone.
yeah,
Jen, thanks for jumping in
that's
tonight.
all I
We
wanted to.
appreciate
Yeah,
you. Thank
thank
you.
you, gentlemen. Have a great night.
You too. Thanks a lot. Well, again, one last plug for your book. This is Daniella. She's been incredible and gracious with her time in this conversation this evening. It's UnCULTured. It's available in her TikTok shop. You can also link there through the link tree in my bio. Also available. That's autographed, that version, if you purchase through TikTok shop. And we learned earlier that it was discounted, but yet capitalism. So let's
And I
celebrate
think
capitalism.
these guys also get affiliate money when you buy it. So like everybody's winning.
Bonus. Thank you.
Can I buy a Happy Meal with that affiliate money?
Probably not even.
Damn it.
But if
And then also,
enough, yes. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, honestly, this has been one of the coolest book experiences that I've had so far.
thank you.
I
for
so
saying
much
that.
appreciate your care. I've not done a 3-hour interview yet, and like this was the best one I could have asked for. So thank you.
Well,
Steve,
thank you.
for
It's
planning.
it's
Anthony,
our
thank
pleasure.
you so much.
How would you like to close out tonight?
So let me give people 2 tips. This is what I would say to every college student in America if I could, which is if any group is trying to recruit you and everybody is pretty and happy and shiny and bouncy, run. Right? Like that is attitude, interference control, and it's no bueno. That's why they won't let me say it on college campuses, because fraternities, right? And the second one is anyone that tells you you're so mature for your age is targeting you. They're not complimenting you, right? Precocious maturity comes from growing up out of order, which often comes from trauma. And one of the things that happens when we leave cults is we just fall for cult leaders over and over again. So those are 2 practical things that I like to leave people with. And then just like a plea, like I'm on TikTok. I literally spend my whole workday kind of on TikTok talking to people. I'm writing Culting of America. I'm reading everything I write out loud. Like I'm crowdsourcing the book. And I really, really enjoy interacting with people. So please come. I will be knitting and talking about cults and group behavior. And I'm also, on Instagram and stuff, but just thank you so much. Tell people about UnCULTured if you like it. And thank you for this experience.
And you're obviously please come back when your next iteration of your various amazing ability to put words to paper, because I need some advice in that area, but that's a different conversation another day. But you're welcome back here anytime. And thank you again, and thank you everybody for participating this evening. We have the best mods on TikTok, by the way, Daniella. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to keep this going tonight. We had a lot of organization, a lot of people collaborated. I want to thank RTP and Jen and Felice for streaming this on their YouTube platform as we build up ours. But again, Daniella, thank you so very, very much. Anthony, my brother, thank you very, very much. And friends, have a lovely evening, and thank